Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a Tokyo you won't find in the guidebooks. The neon's buzzing, the alleys are slick with drizzle, and tucked between a curry shop and a massage parlor in Shinjuku sits a bookstore that never bothered listing its opening hours. It smells like damp paper and jasmine tea, and on a good day, you might find an out-of-print Murakami or a weathered poetry chapbook with strange scribbles in the margins. But behind that sleepy storefront, past the broken heater and creaking shelves, was the launch pad of one of Japan's quietest crime empires. Our man? Jiro Kato. Round glasses, corduroy coat. The kind of guy you'd trust to dog-sit or debate Dostoevsky. The only thing more organized than his receipt drawer was the criminal operation hiding beneath it. You probably wouldn't survive this particular bedtime story if you took a wrong turn in real life. But here, you're safe. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where in the world you're listening from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Rain always seems to fall more thoughtfully in Shinjuku. It doesn't lash. It lingers. On a gray Wednesday in 1982, Jiro Kato unlocks the front grate of Kojin Bunko, a bookshop so unassuming it practically apologizes for existing. Inside, it's warmer than the street, but not by much. He switches on a lamp, its yellow glow revealing a curled-up cat on the counter, 2 stacks of invoice slips, and a collection of handwritten customer notes tied with string. He isn't in a rush. Jiro never is. Customers drift in like leaves, students, quiet grandmas, suit-wrinkled salarymen. He nods politely, sells an old novella for 400 yen, wraps it in brown paper. But if you looked closely, you might notice the handoff includes a second receipt. Longer, with a note in faded purple ink and a tiny red dot near the top right. Just a bookseller's eccentric system? That's what everyone assumed. It wasn't. That red dot meant something had cleared customs that morning. A specific shipment. Not of books, but of chemicals. Precursors for a cheap, fast-cooked amphetamine, Jiro's contacts synthesized in a borrowed sake brewery 2 wards over. The customer, a housewife in her 40s, slides the receipt into her coat sleeve without even looking at it. She buys a small poetry collection on the way out. No one watching would suspect a thing. Many people still think that Jiro fell into crime by accident, that the store became a front only after debt collectors pushed him. But the truth? He was never in debt. The margins were thin, sure, but Kojin Bunko had always turned a modest profit. He kept tidy ledgers, used 2 pens, black for business, red for secrets. Historical records show that in the early 1980s, Tokyo's black market was in flux. With the American military pulling tighter on post-war agreements and the Yakuza shifting into more sophisticated rackets, there was suddenly space for quiet entrepreneurs who didn't carry knives, but carried notebooks. Jiro had no tattoos, no missing fingers, no brawls in his past. Just pages. Lots and lots of pages. That winter, a college dropout named Takahiro begins frequenting the shop. Long hair, too many questions. Jiro watches him steal a paperback on nihilism. Instead of calling it out, he slips a small envelope inside the book's back cover before restocking it. The next day, Takahiro returns and leaves a neatly wrapped gift on the counter, a fountain pen and an apology note. That afternoon, he becomes Jiro's first runner. No threats, just mutual understanding. Jiro knows he has something, an infrastructure others overlook. Bookstores are sacred. No one raids a library. No one suspects the quiet man rearranging the Tokugawa history shelf is scheduling a drug drop with a hidden index card. By spring, Jiro replaces the store's floorboards with hollow compartments. Every Thursday, during an inventory deep clean, he retrieves small bundles wrapped in wax paper, each marked with haiku references that only he deciphers. The cat on the counter? Also trained. She meows when someone lingers too long near the back stacks. Okay, that part might be folklore, but locals still swear it's true. Here's something most biographies miss. Jiro never carried a phone. Not at the store, not at home. He communicated entirely by book margins, paper receipts, and folded stationery. Some say he believed electronics compromised the art of crime. That if you couldn't run a criminal empire through paper alone, you weren't truly in control. On the 4th floor of the nearby Kanda printing district, a small press begins producing counterfeit bookplates, labels glued inside the covers of rare finds. In reality, these bookplates contained smuggled information, recipes, dates, chemical diagrams. One even had a full ledger written in microprint, mistaken by police for weird decorative calligraphy during a later raid. Jiro's calm is unshakable. When a local gang comes asking for protection fees, he invites their rep inside and makes him tea. They talk about existentialism for an hour and part as friends. The thug leaves with a book on Confucian ethics and no money. 1 week later, Jiro's store is mysteriously exempted from all street-level extortion for the next 5 years. Many people still think the Yakuza respected him. Maybe. Or maybe they just feared what kind of ledgers he might be keeping. By autumn, Kojin Bunko begins expanding its rare imports shelf. The books aren't rare, and they aren't imports. But inside the dust jackets are new tracking codes, bartered contacts, and subtle confirmations of drop-offs in Saitama and Ueno. A woman named Yuki, who runs a failing photography studio, joins his network. She handles distribution under the guise of delivering framed portraits to elderly clients. What's closest to Jiro in all of this? It's not the money, it's not the power, it's the sense of authorship. He's writing something, even if it's invisible. Every move is a paragraph, every contact, a comma. His life is a manuscript, unfolding one quiet chapter at a time. And even now, sitting on a crate of banned comics in the back room, he's smiling. Outside, the rain hushes down like a page being turned. The bell above the door rings again. Another story begins. It starts, as most things do, with something small. A folded paper tucked inside a receipt. Not unusual, except it isn't a coupon or a return policy. It's a sentence in Latin. Ex libris noctis, handwritten in violet ink, underlined twice. Takahiro reads it, seated on a bench outside the bookstore with a canned coffee and a half-smoked cigarette. He doesn't speak Latin, but he knows enough to sense it's not just a flourish. He flips the paper over, an address in Suganami, no names, just a time, 10:47 a.m. That specificity tells him everything. This is real. He glances back toward the bookstore, sees the familiar silhouette of Jiro shelving something by a window, like always. At 10:47 the next morning, Takehiro's knock is answered by a man with slippers and a croaking kettle behind him. No one speaks. A plastic bag is handed over, newspaper wrapped, tied with twine. Inside, he finds 6 packets of tiny white pills labeled Vitamin D Private Batch. No instructions. Just a quiet nod from the man, and the door shuts. Back in Shinjuku, Jiro logs the drop-off with an old typewriter. The key for M sticks every third strike, so his records always have faint smudges on that letter. In a locked cabinet behind Volume 3 of A History of No Theater, he files the log beside others marked with similar coded phrases. Quiet Vitamin, Snowscript, Night Editions. It's an archive only he can read. Here's the thing about Tokyo in the 1980s. Many believe it was the last decade where analog privacy truly thrived. Surveillance was patchy, cameras were rare, and if you knew which alleys to cut through, you could disappear from the system for weeks. The city was moving fast, but there were still cracks to slip through. Jiro made those cracks feel like open highways. Meanwhile, the bookstore's clientele shifts. More single men, more chain smokers, more visitors who don't even pretend to browse. They arrive, nod at Jiro, purchase some obscure philosophy title, and leave with a second item tucked discreetly under the register. It's all too smooth, too efficient, but Jiro doesn't get sloppy. That's the difference. He adds noise, adds confusion. Every third customer receives a decoy message, completely harmless. The crow sings only at dusk, or buy fish on Wednesdays. They're told it's part of a Reader's Club riddle contest. Most ignore it. A few obsess. One man reportedly spent 6 weeks trying to solve the fish sentence before finally giving up and moving to Okinawa. Jiro laughs when he hears about it, but softly, like the punchline of an inside joke he wrote for himself. In the back of the shop, there's a small trap door. Not to a basement. Tokyo isn't generous with basements, but to a crawl space barely 4 feet tall. That's where the real archives are kept. Ledgers, sealed envelopes, Polaroids, shipping manifests. Jiro crawls down every Sunday evening, cataloging by candlelight. Not for sentiment. He simply doesn't trust electricity where paper is concerned. Here's a historical fact worth pausing on. During this decade, the demand for speed was reshaping Tokyo. Bullet trains, late-night convenience stores, express everything. Crime followed suit. Drug sales, extortion, gambling, all streamlined. But Jiro leaned backward against the tide. He moved slower. And in that stillness, he built something sturdier than most fast-burning syndicates ever could. Takahiro proves useful beyond expectations. He's clever, patient, and most importantly, invisible. The kind of guy who leaves no impressions in snow. Jiro tests him once, gives him a blank envelope with only a feather inside, tells him it's urgent. Takahiro doesn't ask questions. 3 days later, he returns with a sealed envelope and a bruised knuckle. Jiro never asks what happened, and Takahiro never volunteers. They understand each other now. The red dot system on receipts evolves. Different shapes, different placements. A red square means the drop failed. A green underline signals the police are sniffing around. A blue star. Change the courier route. It's symphonic, if you know the notes. Yuki, the photographer, expands their network with flair. She disguises pill packets inside framed photos, hollowed-out Polaroid cameras, even photo albums rigged to split at a specific page. Her clientele includes retired teachers, failed actors, and one elderly woman who insists on paying with persimmons. Jiro accepts. Later, they discover she's the widow of a former prosecutor. The irony isn't lost on him. Many people still think, Takahiro says one evening, that you're just some weird book guy. Jiro smiles, slicing a mandarin into neat segments. That's the idea. At this point, Kojin Bunko barely resembles a store. It's a theater set. Books still line the shelves, but the real action is in the cracks, beneath the tiles, inside hollowed dictionaries, behind false walls. Jiro installs a mirror with a slight warp at the top of the stairs. From a certain angle, it shows who lingers too long near the back exit. He calls it his reader review section. A new addition to the team arrives. Ayaka, a university student and calligraphy enthusiast. She designs intricate bookplates, technically artworks, but embedded with microdots that contain maps, codes, and sometimes recipes. Her specialty is blending the sacred with the sly. A collector once paid 300,000 yen for a scroll that secretly mapped every drop site in Nakano Ward. One night, as the rain falls sideways, a government auditor stumbles into the shop during what he thinks is a routine inspection. He browses, bored, and buys a volume on Edo period architecture. Jiro includes an extra receipt, blank. No dot, no note, no signal. Just a test. The man studies it, glances up, pockets it, and nods slowly. He walks out without a word. 3 months later, that same auditor approves a zoning variance for the building next door, granting Jiro covert access to an adjoining storeroom. No one ever files the paperwork. Here's what's closest to Jiro: the precision. The idea that with enough patience, anything can be bent to fit inside a book. The world isn't about brute force. It's about narrative. You just have to write the right one, page by patient page, and that's why, even now, as Shinjuku swells with noise, Jiro stands by the window of his quiet store, sipping barley tea, watching a paper plane someone threw from the rooftop across the street. It floats down, spirals, then lands near the shop door. Jiro steps outside, picks it up and unfolds it. 3 words, scribbled in neat kana. Tomorrow at dusk. He nods. Another chapter awaits. At precisely 5:03 p.m. the next day, dusk being more of a suggestion than an exact time, a man with a corduroy cap and a slight limp enters Kojin Bunko. He's holding a newspaper under his arm, but doesn't seem to notice the stacks of rare magazines by the front window. Instead, he walks straight to the back and stands before the shelf labeled Translations Out of Print. Jiro doesn't greet him. Doesn't need to. The man slides out a worn copy of The Master and Margarita, flips to page 212, and tucks a small folded sheet into the binding. He replaces the book carefully, as if aligning it for some unseen librarian. Then he leaves. No purchase. No eye contact. 15 minutes later, Jiro retrieves the book. Page 212 contains nothing, visibly. But under UV light, the paper glows faintly. A coded date and location, paired with what seems to be a molecular diagram. He recognizes the shape. It's a new variant. Faster synthesis, cleaner results, but more volatile. The first shipment comes 3 days later, wrapped in repurposed textbooks and sealed inside crates marked Student Supplies, Hokkaido Region. Takahiro unloads them at a train station locker before heading to a curry shop where a second courier waits, posing as a delivery app cyclist. The entire chain takes under 4 hours. This is Jiro's first real move into synthetic manufacturing, a pivot from mere distribution. It's riskier, but it also marks a transition from middleman to producer, from bookseller to architect. Historically, Japan's post-war black market evolved through necessity, not ambition. American rations, medical supplies, even coffee, all of it filtered through quiet networks and word-of-mouth codes. In the 1980s, that old system collided with a surge of underground capitalism. Jiro stood at that crossroads, clipboard in one hand, bookmark in the other. By now, the customer list has ballooned, but it's still quiet. No flashy cars, no tattoos on display. Jiro's empire doesn't stomp, it glides. He's built something uniquely literate. His couriers read poetry. His dealers hand off goods wrapped in pages from banned novels. His labels are written in kanji so archaic, they read like spells. One dealer gets too curious. A high school dropout named Shun tries cooking his own batch using scraps of formula he pieced together from discarded packaging. It doesn't go well. He survives, but barely. His mother shows up at the shop 3 days later, demanding answers, sobbing into the sleeve of her coat. Jiro listens without speaking, then hands her a sealed envelope. Inside is an anonymous scholarship fund registration, already filled out for Shun's younger sister. A week later, she's enrolled in a private school. The family never returns. Jiro removes their file, burns it in a copper bowl behind the shop, and scatters the ashes into the alley drain. Many people still think that Jiro kept everything, every note, every name. But that's only half true. He kept what mattered. The rest? Let the rain take it. The new shipments are packed tighter now. Smaller doses, purer product. He names the blend Sumi, ink. It's poetic, and deeply ironic considering its form. Delivered in pressed black tablets that look like sumi sticks used in traditional calligraphy. Ayaka approves. "You're crossing into art," she says. Jiro smiles faintly. "No, I'm just returning it." The distribution model grows more elaborate. Public lockers in parks. Packages buried in fake compost bins behind nurseries. A priest in Bunkyo starts running silent exchanges from his confessional booth. No words spoken, just offerings in envelopes. He never asks for money, just donations to restore the temple roof. Jiro sends a fresh tarp anonymously the next week. He's not ungrateful, just quiet about it. Meanwhile, Yuki's photo business becomes a front for bulk movement. Her new technique involves hollow photo frames packed with vials, sold as memory boxes to elderly customers. One of them unknowingly passes a shipment across 3 districts, thinking she's delivering her late husband's retirement photos to a cousin. It works beautifully, until she takes a detour for sweet potatoes and forgets the entire errand. The package eventually shows up in a lost and found bin at a local post office. Inside is a note, handwritten in Yuki's script. The memory failed, but the story survives. Jiro keeps the note. What's closest to him in these months isn't just the logistics. It's the idea that every single person in the network believes they're part of something more than crime. It's not just drugs. It's performance. It's literature. It's rebellion with an index card. But not everyone's playing by his script. A low-tier gang called the Koenji Boys begins sniffing around. They're loud, careless, and allergic to subtlety. They demand a cut, want to partner on distribution. Jiro meets them once, in a tea house, orders dango, doesn't speak for 10 full minutes, just lets the room fill with awkwardness and the soft clink of ceramic. Then he opens his briefcase. Inside are 2 books. One's a rare first edition of Silence by Shusaku Endo. The other is a children's pop-up book. He slides the first to the leader. "This," he says, "is how you run an empire." He slides the second to the lackey beside him. "This is what you're doing now." They don't take it well, but they also don't return. Many still wonder why that gang vanished entirely within a month. Some say Jiro arranged something. Others believe the Yamaguchi Gumi stepped in, unprompted, out of respect for his methods. Maybe both. Or maybe the Koenji boys just weren't built to handle anything beyond shouting. What matters is that, after that meeting, Jiro redesigns everything. He doubles the encryption on all messages. Courier routes are randomized weekly. book plates are now embedded with wax seals, each containing a sliver of metal detectable only by a custom magnet Yuki carries around her neck. It's the literary version of a spy novel. Tokyo's getting noisier. The economy is booming. Shoulder pads are in. Karaoke is king. And everyone's either building skyscrapers or buying land no one's walked on. But beneath it all, Jiro's network hums along like a secret chord in the city's symphony. One afternoon, as sakura petals begin to litter the shop's awning, a teenage girl enters. She's holding a copy of the Book of Tea, says nothing, hands it to Jiro. Inside the front cover is a sketch, 3 dots in a triangle, and a string of digits. He nods, stamps the inside flap with the store's seal, and tucks a new note into her pocket without her noticing. She leaves without ever saying a word, just another reader, just another chapter. By now, the shelves of Kojin Bunko are telling their own kind of lie. They curve under the weight of books no one has read, their spines facing out like silent sentries. First editions, pulp classics, old trade manuals, each one part decoy, part door. Jiro's regular customers still browse, of course, but the shop's real value lives between those covers, folded behind book plates, inside hollowed sections, coded in ink too pale for the casual glance. And it's in this fiction-laced reality that Jiro receives his first true import. Not a book, a man. He arrives with little warning, mid-30s, well-dressed, stiff posture, a foreigner fluent in Japanese but speaking like he's translating in his head. He goes by Claude, though no one believes that's his name. He claims to be a paper dealer from Belgium, interested in rare Japanese prints. Jiro listens politely as Claude talks about linen blends, acid-free preservation, the dwindling art of hand-pressed rice paper. But something's off. He's too interested in the back rooms, too casual when the topic turns to logistics. When Claude reaches for a cigarette and the pack inside his jacket shifts like it's too heavy, Jiro knows. The man is either an informant or a buyer for someone watching carefully. And either way, he's dangerous. Still, Jiro entertains him for 2 hours, offers tea, then sake. They talk about basho, then about Belgian beer, then about how rain sounds different depending on the type of roof it hits. Jiro uses a string of increasingly obscure literary references, none of which Claude catches. Finally, as Claude prepares to leave, Jiro hands him a book, Bachan by Natsume Soseki. Inside is a pressed sakura petal and a note that reads simply, "Not every page turns." Claude never returns. That night, Jiro orders a full sweep of all current routes. 2 drop points are rerouted. 1 runner is benched. The crawl space beneath the store is rearranged again. A burner ledger is copied and relocated to a public safety deposit box under Ayaka's name, accessed only via a book loan card from a library that no longer exists. This is how Jiro survives, by never trusting the same path twice. Every move is a story rewritten, every threat a rough draft to be revised, but growth brings friction. More players, more noise. One evening, a courier named Hideki misses a drop. He's late by 6 hours. When he finally shows up, he's pale, shaking. His motorcycle helmet is cracked. His shoes are gone. Jiro doesn't ask what happened, just listens. Hideki's story is rambling. Something about men in masks, a wrong turn, a basement he was shoved into, but then inexplicably let go. He says he thinks it was a warning. Jiro nods once, then sends him to Yuki, who's already been instructed to give Hideki a new identity, a new wardrobe, and a one-way ferry ticket to Kyushu. He never comes back. Historical records from the late 80s show an uptick in ghost departures from Tokyo. People who simply vanish, leaving behind jobs, apartments, even families. Many of them, it's rumored, had links to underground courier work. Police reports often labeled them as runaways or mental health cases. But those who knew better understood. They were edited out. Jiro's system evolves once again. He introduces bookmarks, special couriers who move information only, never product. Their task? To create false trails. One bookmark might hand off a ledger copy with intentional errors. Another leaves behind receipts coded with dates that never materialize. Some of these trails are designed specifically to be found by authorities. Others are left like riddles to rival gangs. It's disinformation dressed as literature. Many people still think that Jiro never directly harmed anyone, that his empire was bloodless. But that's naive. He wasn't a saint, just selective. When a rival outfit poisons one of Yuki's contacts in an attempt to trace her distribution path, Jiro responds in kind, without a gun, without a fist. He sends 3 leather-bound books to their safe house. Inside each, a letter detailing their financials, blackmail-worthy photographs, and a personal note that reads, "This chapter ends here." The safe house burns down 2 days later. The cause is listed as faulty wiring. No one investigates. What's closest to Jiro during these tense months is not control. It's the illusion of calm. He lights incense every morning, replaces the shop cat's worn cushion, rearranges the front table so that the poetry books face the entrance. Even when the pressure builds, even when he knows people are watching, he preserves the atmosphere like a monk tending a garden. Ayaka notices. She's begun sleeping at the store some nights, saying she's just working late. But they both know better. She doesn't talk much about her past, only that her brother once worked for a construction firm with ties to someone too loud. He disappeared during a routine job. Jiro doesn't pry. But one night, she leaves a calligraphy scroll on his desk. It reads, "The sword hides behind the brush." He frames it and hangs it above the stairwell. That week, a new challenge arrives. Not from gangs or foreign agents, but from the very medium Jiro has mastered. A massive warehouse fire in Chiba wipes out the printing facility that had quietly produced his coded books. Gone are the plates, the ink, the smuggled paper stock. The city lists it as an accidental blaze. But many in the network don't believe in coincidence anymore. Jiro spends 3 nights rewriting his entire supply strategy. He reaches out to an old contact in Osaka, a woman named Noriko, once a political pamphleteer, now operating an underground zine ring from an abandoned train car. She agrees to help, for a price. What she wants is strange. An original manuscript, written by Jiro himself, chronicling the rise of his network in fictional form. He doesn't blink. He agrees. Over the next 3 weeks, he writes, at night, by candlelight. The manuscript is part memoir, part cipher, part parable. Characters are named after insects. Places are described in metaphor. The antagonist is a crow who speaks in riddles. It's beautiful and terrifying. When he hands it over, Noriko reads 1 page, smiles, and says, "I'll give this 10 editions. After that, you're on your own." She keeps her word. The books begin to circulate again. Even better, they're now being passed around by Tokyo's underground poetry scene. They become collectibles. A student performance group adapts 1 chapter into a stage play. No one knows it's real, not even the actors. That's how deeply the myth is embedding itself. Even the city begins to forget that this is a criminal operation. To most, Kojin Bunko is just a quirky little shop with good taste and a habit of attracting strange visitors. Jiro is seen as a relic, a nostalgic holdover from a gentler era, a harmless eccentric, and that's exactly how he wants it. Still, every evening, before closing up, Jiro does one last ritual. He picks a book at random from the shelf, opens it to the center, and writes one sentence inside in invisible ink. No one knows what they say. Maybe warnings, maybe confessions, maybe just endings waiting to be read. The fire at the Chiba warehouse leaves a scent in Jiro's memory. Burned ink, wet timber, and a hint of lemon bleach. It lingers even after the new Osaka press takes over production. There's something about the permanence of ash that makes him sharpen his routines. From now on, he decides, every shipment will have a false twin, a duplicate package filled with blank paper, useless maps, or reversed codes. If the authorities, or worse, competitors, intercept a crate, they won't know which half of the story they've caught. It's a literary decoy, the red herring disguised in a plot twist. Jiro's operation thrives on this kind of asymmetry. He isn't faster, he's not stronger, but he's always 2 moves more patient than anyone else. And in Tokyo's underworld, that's a lethal advantage. Takahiro takes over logistics for the new double distribution model. He's older now, sharper, quieter. He wears suits tailored just enough to blend into the Marunouchi crowd, the kind with slim pockets that hold more than pens. He sets up a rotation of couriers using public transportation hubs: Ueno, Akihabara, Nippori, each one timed to train schedules, with handoffs performed mid-escalator or at vending machines where a certain choice signals a drop. For example, choosing Pocari Sweat from a specific machine at 9:13 a.m. in Shinakubo signals an inbound transfer. Lemon tea means abort. It sounds like fiction, but the system works so well, one runner writes a haiku about it and submits it anonymously to a poetry contest. It wins second place. Here's a historical fact. In 1986, the Tokyo Metropolitan Police received a tip about narcotics being funneled through retail anomalies in the Kanda district. They launched a 3-week investigation that netted exactly 1 arrest. An elderly man caught with a counterfeit bookplate. He insisted it was a wedding invitation. The report was shelved. Inconclusive activity with artistic intention. That's the brilliance of Jiro's empire. Plausible deniability, wrapped in cultural respectability. The moment you accuse a man of using a haiku contest to move drugs, you sound like the lunatic. But cracks begin to show. Yuki, always graceful under pressure, becomes less consistent. She misses a handoff in Ebisu, claims she was followed, but Takahiro is skeptical. They argue quietly in the stairwell behind the shop one evening. Words like reckless and sentimental are whispered with the kind of force that implies past loyalty, not present trust. Jiro overhears, says nothing. That night, he invites both for dinner. Not at the shop, but at a tucked-away izakaya with dim lanterns and floors that creak just enough to remind guests of time passing. Over grilled mackerel and cold sake, he tells a story. It's about a famous poet who hid his final manuscript inside a teapot. When he died, no one could find it. Years later, the teapot was sold at auction, and the new owner, unaware, used it for years to serve oolong. By the time the manuscript was discovered, soaked, browned, illegible, it was too late. All that remained was the title. Things best left boiled. They all laugh. But the warning is received. Yuki apologizes. Takahiro offers her a new route. Slower, safer, farther from her usual tracks. Jiro doesn't intervene. He simply watches the adjustments take place. Like an editor watching a scene rewrite itself in real time, what's closest to him now is not the story. It's the people telling it. His crew, if they can be called that, has grown from oddballs to specialists. Ayaka now runs her own forgery studio. She trains 2 apprentices, both teenage girls who think they're entering an art collective. One of them, May, has a gift for mimicking antique brushwork. She reproduces Edo period scripts so well, one piece ends up in a museum exhibition. Jiro visits, smiles, and walks away without saying a word. In the back of Kojin Bunko, a locked drawer holds their names. Not files, not photos, just small slips of paper with kanji drawn in Ayaka's hand. They're literary signatures, Jiro calls them. Meanwhile, a local politician begins sniffing around. Councilman Hiroto Nakashima. Young, ambitious, big on urban cultural reform. He wants to modernize Shinjuku's retail core. Too many dusty old bookshops, he says in a televised interview. Jiro watches the clip once, then again, takes a sip of barley tea. He responds by publishing a limited edition poetry collection titled Dust We Call Heritage. Every copy includes a miniature map of Shinjuku's oldest bookstores, including Kojin Bunko. The campaign goes viral in quiet literary circles. Students start organizing reading pilgrimages. Tourists trickle in. Councilman Nakashima backs off, but Jiro knows that fame is its own kind of infection. He hires a new staff member, Junpei, a soft-spoken man in his 50s with a background in restoration. His job, to maintain the illusion. He dusts shelves, recommends books, chats with grandmothers about the changing seasons. But behind that kind exterior is a man with a perfect memory and 3 decades of handwriting analysis under his belt. He begins curating the book rotation, rearranging coded books so no pattern ever forms. Even if someone visited daily, they'd never catch the same shelf twice. It's narrative camouflage. Still, the pressure mounts. A package goes missing in Kichijoji. Courier vanishes. No trace. The route was considered clean, used 5 times without issue. That makes it even more disturbing. Jiro orders a full blackout. For 7 days, all product movement ceases. The bookstore becomes just that, a bookstore. Customers browse, buy, sip tea. No codes, no couriers, no whispers. Just words and ink and silence. During that week, Jiro rewrites every drop code, abandons old metaphors, invents new ones. Now, delivery signals are tied to poems from foreign authors, translated into Japanese and then back into near nonsense. A courier might say, "The sparrow lands west of regret," and only 3 people in Tokyo would know that meant Tuesday, northbound, before dusk. Many people still think Jiro enjoyed the puzzle. But it wasn't joy. It was insurance. That same week, a new poem appears on the corkboard outside the store, unsigned. Rain falls on fiction, but only real pages bleed. Hide your endings well. Locals think it's lovely. Tourists take photos. Jiro just tacks a blank note beside it and walks inside. Later, Takahiro burns the original in a tin dish. Ayaka draws the ashes into an inkstone and creates a calligraphy scroll with one word, Owari, the end. Only of course it isn't. At 6:14 a.m., the lights inside Kojin Bunko flicker on. The city outside is just beginning to stir, but inside the shop, everything already hums in order. Jiro moves quietly, brushing dust from the poetry shelf, straightening the stack of literary magazines that no one ever buys, but everyone touches. The air is still, steeped in the scent of old paper and roasted barley tea, which he starts brewing with the rhythm of someone who knows each second matters more than the sip itself. But this morning, something is off. The mail slot, a creaky, rusted flap used mostly by local printers, has coughed up a letter with no return address. White envelope, no stamp, no handwriting, just a single black ink fingerprint. He slides it open with a bone letter opener, one of his oldest tools. Inside is a photograph, old, grainy, but unmistakable. It's Hideki, the courier who vanished weeks ago. He's standing beside an unfamiliar man in a cheap suit, eyes bruised, smile stiff. On the back, written in clean katakana, so many bookmarks, but only one story. Jiro doesn't pause. He doesn't blink. He folds the photo, places it into an unmarked ledger tucked beneath a stack of local histories, and walks to the counter, where a fresh notebook waits for its first mark. With a steel-tipped pen, he begins a new entry. Top line: new authors arriving. This is how he always reacts to threats. Not with noise, not with retaliation, but with record-keeping. Elsewhere in Tokyo, Junpei begins revising the drop network. Reroutes are plotted in red string across a corkboard hidden behind the memoir section. Takehiro updates the courier rotations. Ayaka rewrites the codebooks, replacing older poetry cues with obscure fragments of 17th century Dutch shipping logs. And Jiro? Jiro starts reading. He reads everything, every night. Receipts, courier logs, purchase records, scraps of half-burned packaging. Somewhere, he believes, is the error. The small crack in the narrative that lets someone rewrite one of his chapters without permission. He finds it on the 5th night. A single delivery from a public locker near Asagaya. Not the package itself, but the locker number. 451. He's never used that number. Not once. But it showed up on a forged code sheet retrieved from a courier's satchel 3 weeks ago. He smiles. A literary joke. Fahrenheit 450. Someone is taunting him. Here's a historical fact. Fahrenheit 451, Ray Bradbury's dystopian tale of censorship and burning books, was banned in some schools for being controversial. Irony, of course, being its middle name. Jiro writes a single note. Counter-reader detected. Then he walks to the back room, removes a false panel in the floor, and retrieves a small lacquer box. Inside are 6 bookmarks, each hand-painted in indigo. They are not ordinary bookmarks. These are people. Readers turned shadows, trained to move without notice, speak without speaking, and gather details others can't. They were his last resort, his invisible ink. He gives them names borrowed from forgotten authors. Sayo, Kinoshita, Tetsuo, Hanai, Michio, and Rei. Each receives a sealed book. Different titles, different clues. Their missions are simple. Trace the source of the photograph, retrieve Hideki if possible, and leave no citation behind. As they vanish into the city, Jiro repositions the store. He pulls the fiction shelf forward by half an inch, replaces the front window display with children's books and seasonal essays. He even adds a new sign that reads, "Closed Wednesdays," though they remain open, quietly, as always. The entire storefront takes on a slightly less suspicious air, because nothing says innocent like inconsistency. Meanwhile, the public starts noticing something strange. Posters for poetry readings begin appearing across Shibuya and Shinjuku. They feature stylized black and white portraits and dates that don't make sense. April 31st, for example, or second Friday of the 10th week. To most, it's modern art nonsense. But to Jiro's crew, these are signals. Ayaka designs each poster to carry dual meanings. A swirl in the background points to a rendezvous point. A smudge near the signature means bring backups. It's high art, wrapped around low caution. One courier, is almost caught at a drop point near Ueno Park. The buyer, a young man with a clipped accent and shoes that squeak too much, asks too many questions. The courier pivots, says he mistook him for someone else, and leaves. 2 hours later, that same man is spotted outside Kojin Bunko, pretending to take photos of a street map. Junpei follows, silently. The man walks in circles for half an hour, then boards a train at Iidabashi. Junpei follows to the third stop, then vanishes. Just like that, he returns to the store the next morning and places a wrapped package on Jiro's desk. Inside, a camera, a notebook in Korean, and a disposable phone. Unused. Jiro nods, doesn't ask what happened, just replaces a book on the history shelf with a new title, The Vanishing Point. Many people still think that Jiro's empire avoided direct conflict by virtue of its cleverness. But cleverness alone doesn't sustain an empire this long. There's another ingredient: curation. Knowing which pages to print and which to burn. And speaking of curation, Yuki returns from a photography retreat up north. But her hands shake slightly when she drinks tea, and she speaks only in unfinished sentences. Jiro doesn't pry. But that evening, she leaves a single Polaroid in the drawer behind the register. It's of a snow-covered field. No faces, no buildings, just white. On the back, written in pencil, "We aren't the only ones with ink." That phrase repeats in Jiro's mind for days. We aren't the only ones with ink. Tokyo isn't a blank canvas anymore. It's a palimpsest. Layers upon layers. Every new code, every courier route is overwritten on old stories. Some told by other hands, and some by hands no one remembers. One night, as rain taps like fingers on the roof tiles, Jiro writes a new list in his red ledger. It's shorter than usual. Only 5 items. Replace every copy of Silence in circulation. Reprint the Night Reader series with new code sets. Burn all unused book plates from Chiba. Meet Ayaka's request for a new apprentice. Stop sleeping upstairs. That last one stays circled for days before he finally acts. He begins renting a capsule in a quiet corner of Ikebukuro. Anonymous. No patterns. The owner doesn't even ask for ID, just cash and punctuality. Every night, he leaves the store by the back entrance and walks slowly through alleys lit by vending machines and faintly buzzing neon. He's a ghost in corduroy, carrying a folded umbrella and a paperback he'll never read. But he's not vanishing, just changing chapters. Jiro doesn't sleep like he used to. The capsule is clean, dim, and narrow. A soft pod wrapped in buzzing plastic silence. There's a curtain, not a door. A reading light with 3 brightness settings. Enough room to lie down, not enough to pace. And that's exactly why he chose it. No distractions, no mirrors, no ghosts. He keeps a small notebook tucked under the pillow. Not for plans, not for ledgers, just dreams, or what passes for them now. Fragments, strange lines, words that drift into his head like leaves blown under the door. Ink doesn't dry in silence. He blinked, and the city misspelled itself. A page doesn't know the weight of its story. He doesn't try to make sense of them. That's not their job. Meanwhile, the shop continues. Kojin Bunko becomes quieter, if that's possible. Junpei adjusts the bell on the door so it rings softer. Ayaka begins using white ink for customer notes, only legible under blacklight. Even the cat moves less, curled like a comma on the windowsill, yet beneath that stillness, movement sharpens. The 6 bookmarks, sent to trace the source of Hideki's disappearance report back, indirectly. Each delivers a coded update via literary reference slipped into regular bookstore transactions. Sayo buys a book on moth migration and asks if the midnight chapter is still folded. That means she found someone who'd seen Hideki, alive, but scared. Hanai returns a borrowed volume and mentions that The ink was dry, but the echo wasn't, meaning Hideki might have talked. Only one bookmark Ray doesn't report at all. Jiro waits 3 days, then 4. On the 5th, a poetry chapbook arrives in the mail. Self-published. No return address. The author's name, Kureha R. A known pseudonym Ray once used in an art class. Inside, the poems are abstract, dense with metaphor. But Jiro doesn't need to read far. The 6th poem opens with, "I dropped the name you gave me in a river too wide to echo." That's enough. Ray's alive, but out. She's signaling a soft exit. No longer safe, no longer useful. Possibly compromised, but not in danger. Jiro marks her profile with a black X and places it into a separate drawer labeled JuPZ, Old Pages. He doesn't cry, doesn't sigh, just slides the drawer shut. Here's a historical fact. In 1987, a scandal broke involving Tokyo's narcotics division and several illegal surveillance operations conducted without warrants. Publicly, the story was smothered in bureaucratic fog. Internally, it sent ripples across every gray zone in the city. Networks like Jiro's became harder to track, not because they grew quieter, but because the ones doing the listening had started listening to each other. In that climate, Jiro does something radical. He expands, not product, not personnel, distribution. He contacts Noriko in Osaka, tells her to find a translator. He wants Sumi, the black ink amphetamine variant, packaged under a new name and moved into Korean and Taiwanese ports. She asks why. "Because the story's getting boring here," Jiro says and hangs up. Hayaka is the first to challenge him. "You always said Tokyo was the right stage. You wrote this city." He pours her tea gently. "And now the city's reading ahead of me." She doesn't like it, but she doesn't argue again. The expansion begins with a set of beautifully produced art books, limited edition, bilingual print, titled Silhouettes of Sleep. Inside each is a black tablet, hidden inside the spine, behind a fold-out section of the book that showcases calligraphy styles. Buyers think it's a bonus. In reality, it's the first Sumi shipment to Busan. Jiro chooses cities like he chooses metaphors. Precisely. He doesn't want loud, crowded ports. He wants back alleys near art galleries, language schools with eccentric administrators, poetry cafes with untraceable cash registers. He wants cultures that still treat paper with reverence. It's not about smuggling, it's about placement. Takahiro arranges new career partnerships. Young men from Okinawa, a disgraced violinist from Sapporo, a translator who once worked for NHK. They're trained quickly, paid generously, and sworn in not with an oath, but with a book. Jiro gives each a different volume. "What's this?" one asks. "It's the story we won't write down," Jiro replies. By summer, Kojin Bunko hosts a private event, a reading of Lost Voices in Post-War Literature. Attendance is by invitation only. Guests arrive at staggered intervals, walk through a dim hallway lined with glowing haiku projected onto rice paper, and receive an envelope marked with their name. Inside, a poem, a schedule, and a coded instruction. Only 4 of the 15 guests are real. The rest, plants, observers, disruptors. That night is more than an event. It's a diagnostic. Jiro watches from behind a one-way glass wall, sipping plum wine, noting every reaction. One man lingers too long on a projection about betrayal. One woman reads her envelope, then immediately tears it up. Later that evening, Junpei finds the woman waiting outside the store. "I like the poem," she says. He doesn't reply, just hands her another envelope. Some say this is when Jiro crossed a line, not legally, but narratively, that he stopped hiding the operation and began turning it into performance art. But that's missing the point. Many people still think crime is about money, power, territory. Jiro knows it's about belief. You build something careful enough, elegant enough, and people stop asking if it's real. They just participate. Even the authorities begin to shift. A detective visits the shop one afternoon. Plain clothes. Late 40s. Smells like menthols and curry bread. He asks about a certain volume of post-war essays, supposedly signed by a reclusive critic. Jiro nods, leads him to the back, and hands him the book. The detective opens it, flips to the center. Nothing. Then the back. Still nothing. He shrugs. Well, he says, some books are more about the cover, aren't they? Jiro smiles, offers tea. They drink without speaking. The detective never returns. Later, Jiro places a note in his ledger. Shadow Reader, unpublished. What's closest to him now isn't fear. It's fatigue, not weakness. Just the slow, creeping understanding that even perfectly built sentences eventually fade at the edges. Ink bleeds. Pages yellow. Empires soften with time. But he keeps writing. One ledger line at a time. One false receipt. One silent poem. Because that's the job. Not to win, to continue. It begins, as endings often do, with someone forgetting their place. Not metaphorically, literally. A courier named Kentaro, new, bright-eyed, eager to impress, accidentally swaps 2 delivery books in the back room. One is a decoy, blank pages, fake names, a harmless inventory. The other is the real one, containing schedules, code breakdowns, and 2 months of Sumi supply routes to Busan and Kaohsiung. He realizes the mistake only after the book has been handed off. The recipient, a buyer known only as Hako, the box. A Korean intermediary with a reputation for honoring agreements but zero patience for amateurism. Takahiro is the one who tells Jiro. It's late. The capsule hotel hums with silence and vending machine glow. He handed Hako the true list, Takahiro says. Jiro doesn't even look up. He stares at a receipt on the table. Someone bought No Longer Human that afternoon and left behind a pressed clover inside. How did he take it? Jiro asks. Hako? Takahiro smirks. He smiled. That's how I knew it was bad. The days that follow feel tight, like air being slowly vacuumed out of a locked room. Courier reports come in out of order. One fails to show. 2 buyers miss pickups. One poem-coded drop goes completely cold. Ayaka starts sleeping in the shop again. She moves slower, even when brushing dust from shelves. The cat becomes jumpier, knocking a lacquered bookmark behind the counter and hissing when Junpei tries to retrieve it. And then, the real omen. A letter arrives without a fold. You have to understand, in Jiro's world, a folded letter means privacy, courtesy, a small protective barrier between thought and threat. This letter lies flat. Inside, just one word: rewrite. Here's a historical fact. In Japanese publishing, rewrites aren't merely edits. They can signify a full narrative collapse, scrapping everything, from structure to theme, in pursuit of something salvageable. This isn't a warning, it's a verdict. Jiro doesn't panic. That's not his method. But he does something rare. He takes a day off, leaves the shop in Junpei's care, takes the train to Kamakura, wears a simple sweater and carries no bag, just a single book, The Sound of the Mountain by Kawabata. He finds a bench near the Daibutsu and reads in full sun. It's not nostalgia, it's a test. He wants to see how far the world has drifted without him. While there, a tourist asks him to take a photo. He does. Then walks away before the thank you is finished. Behind him, the camera lens glints. For a moment, he thinks he sees Rei watching from the temple steps. Or maybe just someone with her posture, her stillness. When he returns to Tokyo, something clicks into place. Not in the city, in him. He opens the store early the next morning and moves to the back wall, the one behind modern criticism. Slowly, he begins peeling away layers of wallpaper, each applied over the years like sediment. Beneath it, carved directly into the wall's wooden beam, are names. Dozens, maybe hundreds. Courier code names, routes, lost readers, and in the center, one word, Scribbler. No one has used that name in years. It was Jiro's first handle. Before Kojin Bunko. Before the bookstore even had a roof. Back when he operated out of a mailroom and a stack of hand-folded pamphlets sold to tired factory workers for coins and secrets. He thought he had buried that chapter. Apparently someone remembered. Takehiro bursts in before noon, winded, jacket unzipped. "Hako sent something," he says. It's a package, small, square, wrapped in waxed linen. Inside, a pen, not just any pen. A fountain pen once gifted by Jiro to a boy who wrote haiku for cash during the lean winter of '84. A boy who vanished one summer, swallowed by debt collectors and cigarette smoke. The pen still works. The ink flows blue-black. Attached is a single note. Writers live only if readers allow it. Ayaka reads the note 3 times, then sets it ablaze in the ceramic dish beside the store's tiny incense altar. Junpei doesn't say a word, but the next morning, the shop is rearranged. Entire sections disappear. The mystery shelf becomes gardening. The foreign novels are replaced by cooking memoirs. The lighting shifts subtly, no longer warm, but pale, clinical. Kojin Bunko begins to erase itself, not completely. Just enough to slip back beneath the radar. A bookstore so forgettable that even regulars do a double take when they pass. Only those meant to see the real shelves will know which spine to pull, which floorboard creaks with intent. Jiro doesn't mourn the contraction. He calls it a seasonal edit, but beneath the quiet, he prepares for a new act. He commissions Noriko to begin a second manuscript, one he won't write, but dictate. It's called Footnotes for the Invisible, a story told through omission, through empty parentheses and missing chapters. It will include false memories, wrong names, and maps to buildings that don't exist. Noriko asks who the audience is. He smiles. Whoever finds it by accident. Meanwhile, reports trickle in. Hako has gone dark. His ports are closed. Couriers returning from Korea say the docks are silent. Buyers absent. Not a threat. A withdrawal. A truce, perhaps. Or a retreat. Junpei believes it's fear. Takehiro thinks it's a recalculation. Ayaka? She shrugs. Some stories get bored before the reader does. Many people still think Jiro's empire was one of perfect control. But what they miss is how often he surrendered, by design. He built his networks to outlive him, not depend on him. Redundancy, not heroism. Ink, not blood. That week, Jiro rewrites his own name in the ledger, not in kanji, in katakana, a quieter alphabet. One that doesn't insist on meaning. And then, one night, without telling anyone, he moves back upstairs. The capsule served its purpose. But the shop, creaking, cluttered, steeped in dust and ghost stories, is home. It was never the empire. It was the book. And books, when closed, don't disappear. They wait. The upstairs room hasn't changed much. Same narrow futon. Same window half-fogged from decades of steam drifting up from tea kettles below. The ceiling creaks when the wind nudges the eaves, like the building itself is settling deeper into its own skin. But Jiro notices one thing immediately. Someone has dusted the bookshelf. Not cleaned. Dusted. Meaning someone knew what not to touch. He runs a finger across the spines. A collection of Natsume Soseki, some early Mishima, a few translated Western oddities, Kafka, Camus, even Bukowski. though Jiro keeps him turned backward on the shelf. Not out of shame, just discretion. At the far end of the row, he finds the thin journal. Black cloth cover, frayed corners. Inside, a list of everyone who's ever lived in the space above Kojin Bunko. It's not a long list. Jiro. Before him, a woman named Akiko. Before her, an unnamed typesetter who died mid-paragraph. Before that, no record. Just a blank line and a smudge. Jiro writes one more name. Maybe you? He smiles at the idea, then folds the book shut and tucks it back into place. That night, he dreams of corridors lined with bookshelves that go nowhere. Every path loops. Every title repeats. A maze of memory disguised as progress. When he wakes, he writes it down. Even lost libraries remember their exits. Downstairs, the shop opens late. Junpei claims the cat knocked a vase off a shelf. Ayaka rolls her eyes. It's always the cat's fault. But no one pushes for normalcy. There's a heaviness to the air, a kind of narrative static. You feel it in the pauses between footsteps, in the way Takehiro double-checks the back door locks without being asked. Then, in the middle of the week, something unexpected arrives. A visitor. Elderly, bent-backed, walking stick polished to a shine. She moves slowly between the aisles, running her fingers across the shelves as though reading Braille. Junpei approaches, offers help. She shakes her head. Finally, she reaches the counter and places a book down gently. Ink and Bone. A fantasy novel from overseas. Out of print in Japan. I believe this belongs here, she says. Jiro, watching from the stairs, recognizes her immediately. Her name is Kaidi, a writer of serialized radio dramas in the late 1950s. She vanished from public life after an alleged scandal involving coded messages slipped into broadcast scripts. Messages allegedly used by a syndicate to signal movements across train lines. Never proven, never forgotten. Kaidi looks at Jiro like someone finding an old, unfinished sentence. You kept the story alive, she says softly. He nods. She opens the book. Inside, in her own fading handwriting, are 3 lines. Don't mark this page. Let it flutter in the dark. Some endings can only be borrowed. He takes the book without a word and places it behind the register, between essays on ephemera and the reader's guide to vanishing. Kaide leaves with nothing but a cup of tea. Many people still think Jiro's world operated solely on ink and risk. But those people never visited Kojin Bunko during its quieter hours. Never saw the mothers trading recipes over philosophy books. The college students copying calligraphy off forbidden scrolls. The courier who cried after delivering his last run and being handed, instead of money, a first edition of The Wind Has No Address. This was never just a front. It was a sanctuary. Still, the undercurrents stir. Reports come in from Kyoto. A courier there, using the Sumi variant under the codename Eraser, has been arrested. The charges don't stick, but the arrest is public enough to spook half the Osaka network. Noriko sends a telegram. We need silence. Jiro replies in a package wrapped in wrapping paper decorated with birds. Inside, a single cassette tape. Blank. No label. She'll understand. Back in Tokyo, Ayaka finds a slip of paper in the calligraphy supplies. Not her handwriting. 1 line in crisp block script. Ink dries slower when watched. They change routines again. Couriers wear gloves now. No fingerprints. Drop routes vary twice a week. The bell above the shop is replaced with a chime so subtle it sounds more like wind than welcome. What's closest to Jiro now is the idea of vanishing well. Not disappearing in panic. Not burning the operation in one last blaze. But folding it in, like a favorite coat in the back of a drawer. Hidden, but reachable. Waiting. not running. He begins training someone new, not in codes or logistics, in reading. A young boy, Haruto, age 12, whose mother works at the bakery across the alley. He comes in every day, reads for an hour, returns the books with quiet reverence. Jiro gives him a book without a title. Inside, only blank pages. Haruto opens it. "What's this?" Jiro smiles. "A future draft." Some scholars argue that the quiet resistance in Japan's post-war years was defined not by violence, but by artistry, protest through poetry, messages hidden in sewing patterns, politics passed along through oblique tea ceremony metaphors. Jiro doesn't argue, he just lives it. One rainy evening, he closes the store early. No incident, no threat, just a feeling. He sits upstairs, tea steaming gently, and rereads a favorite line from an obscure novella. Sometimes the most dangerous books are the ones that never claim to be anything but ordinary. Outside, the neon signs flicker. Taxis hum by. A woman laughs far off, muffled by layers of rain and concrete. Inside, the lights dim. Jiro writes one last line for the night in his red ledger. "We are not hiding. We are resting between chapters." The calendar on the shop wall still marks the year as 1988, though no one remembers when Jiro last flipped the page. It's stuck on September, a month of fading heat and creeping caution. Tokyo outside pulses with modernity. Fax machines, neon-lit cafes, pachinko parlors roaring like electric rainstorms. But inside Kojin Bunko, time holds its breath. Jiro begins rewriting his routines, not dramatically, just enough. He no longer walks to the corner shop at the same hour. He shifts his preferred tea from barley to roasted green. He moves a lamp 2 inches to the left. These are not habits born from paranoia. They're punctuation. Pauses in a sentence the city has read too many times. The new courier network stabilizes. Routes are tighter, cleaner, quieter. Gone are the large halls. Now the product moves in fragments. Single doses slipped into the spines of calendars, fake acupuncture guides, translated field manuals. One customer receives his weekly delivery embedded in a hollow bar of soap. Ayaka begins calling the new system footnotes. Not central, not flashy. Just quiet reminders that the story isn't over. But a footnote, by nature, references something, and that something is beginning to attract attention again. A journalist appears, young, smells like printer ink and ambition. His name is Masaru, and he claims to be writing a piece on Shinjuku's literary fringe. He compliments the shop, asks polite questions, lingers too long in the unclassified section, where the dummy books sit, empty inside, just for show. Jiro nods, answers nothing. Instead, he offers Masaru a recommendation. Kitchen by Banana Yoshimoto, a delicate novel, harmless. Masaru smiles, buys it, and leaves. But before he does, he lingers at the door and says, "You know, I think bookstores are like confession booths. Only the priests are quieter." Jiro doesn't blink, doesn't smile, just closes the register a little slower than usual. That night, he writes the sentence down and tapes it to the underside of his desk. Not because it's threatening, but because it's true. Here's a historical fact. In 1988, Japan's literary culture was entering a revival of underground publishing. Zines, self-published novellas, performance poetry readings in subway tunnels. But with this cultural freedom came surveillance. The Tokyo Metropolitan Police created a new division, unofficially nicknamed the Scribes, tasked with monitoring fringe publishers. They claimed to be watching for dissidents. What they found instead were networks like Jiro's, hidden beneath metaphor and verse. Masaru returns 3 days later. This time, he brings a tape recorder. Jiro glances at it once, then points to a small wooden sign behind the counter. We prefer written confessions. The journalist laughs, switches off the device, and begins taking notes by hand. The interview is brief. Jiro answers only in references. Q. When did you start this store? A. When the comma stopped feeling like enough. Q. What's your best-selling title? A. Depends on how you define sold. Q. Do you believe in censorship? A. Only when the reader gets ahead of the author. Masaru leaves with more questions than answers. Jiro is careful not to follow up. Let him chase shadows. Let him file a story no one will publish. But just in case, Junpei starts tailing him. Never close, never twice in the same week. Just enough to know if Masaru steps into the wrong bar or speaks too loudly near the wrong ear. Meanwhile, Noriko in Osaka reports a new issue. One of the Korean ports, Jeonju, is no longer responding. Not police interference, not competitor theft, just silence. Entire shipments returned unopened, codes ignored, couriers not recognized. She sends a message. The story is being redacted. Jiro replies with a photograph. A torn page from a weather manual, circled in red pen. Visibility reduced under fog inversion, a reminder that sometimes the map changes mid-journey. In Tokyo, a new customer begins visiting the shop. Elderly, dressed like an off-duty professor, buys only philosophy books, always pays in coins. But the coins are old, pre-1970, slightly too clean. A message. Ayaka checks the serial numbers, runs them through her analog code book. One coin matches a known identifier from an old courier group, disbanded in 1982 after an internal betrayal. She brings the coin to Jiro. He studies it under a magnifying glass. Then with a sigh, places it into a small glass jar labeled Echoes. Many people still think Jiro's operation was watertight, that every contact, every courier was vetted, trained, flawless. But perfection was never the goal. Resonance was. He didn't want soldiers. He wanted characters, people who could improvise, interpret, adapt. His empire wasn't built on obedience. It was built on shared authorship. Each courier carried not just product, but tone, voice. The mood of the network had to remain consistent. Otherwise, the story broke. And when stories break, readers stop believing. What's closest to Jiro these days is that tension, the risk of disbelief. He walks a little slower through the shop, not out of age, but awareness. He tightens routines not to hide, but to remain legible. Even secrecy must be organized. He begins writing again. Not ledgers, not poetry. A novel, untitled, undated. Fiction in form. Autobiography in spirit. It tells of a bookseller who speaks only in questions, whose shop contains a staircase that leads to every room in the city. The customers never buy anything, but they leave with answers. Takahiro finds a page of it one morning on the copier. He reads it, frowns. Boss, you sure you want to put this into the world? Jiro sips his tea. I'm not putting it into the world. I'm just seeing if the world shows up. Outside, the wind shifts. Cherry blossoms from a distant tree, out of season, out of place, drift through the cracked front door. They land on the philosophy shelf, soft and silent. Jiro doesn't brush them away. The cherry blossoms linger for 3 days, too light to be swept up by brooms, too gentle to provoke complaint. Customers start commenting on them, thinking they're part of some artistic display. One woman asks if Jiro is finally opening up to aesthetics. He smiles, but says nothing. The petals aren't decoration. They're a message. Cherry blossoms in November mean someone has breached the seasonal envelope, a poetic signal in his network used only for 3 things: resurrection, retreat, or retribution. Ayaka's the one who finds the matching signal. slipped into a returned book, the tale of Genji, of course, pressed between the last 2 pages, a dried sakura petal, and a scrap of paper torn from a railway schedule. The fragment shows a single stop, Chofu, circled in red. Junpei reads it over Ayaka's shoulder and mutters, "Someone's waking up a cold station." In the network's older lexicon, cold stations referred to retired drop points, places used in the early days, then buried under layers of safety protocols. They were never fully erased, just shelved, and now one's reactivating. Jiro closes the shop early, not out of fear, out of reverence. He remembers Chofu. It was one of the first points ever used to move his earliest editions. Hand-bound zines filled with soft philosophies and harder truths. Messages sewn into literary criticism. The kind of booklets that were passed hand to hand on night buses and in coin laundries. Not dangerous, just inconvenient to the right people. Back then, Chofu's little bookstall was run by an old professor with arthritis and a memory like a photographic diary. He died in 1985, or so Jiro was told. But now the pedals say otherwise. He boards a train the next morning, wears his old shoes, the ones with the softer soles, carries no ledger, no bag, just a blank book with 2 bookmarks placed at seemingly random intervals. One red, one indigo. The trip is slow. The train smells like cold metal and old perfume. He watches Tokyo slide by, vending machines, teenagers asleep on their phones, construction cranes paused like question marks against the skyline. Chofu hasn't changed much. The bookstore he remembers is gone, replaced by a noodle shop. But the alley behind it still has the same crack in the pavement, the same uneven drain pipe. He walks past it, as if by accident, then stops, coughs once, an old signal, and places the blank book on the ground beneath the rusted stairwell. Then he leaves. It's a passive signal, a waiting one. Someone will respond if someone wants to. Jiro doesn't chase answers. He invites them. Here's a historical fact. In 1989, the Tokyo Underground saw a resurgence in analog communication. Pagers, print codes, cassette signals, tools that had fallen out of favor, returned in new disguises. There's a reason. Digital systems could be intercepted. But ink trusted the reader. Back at Kojin Bunko, the mood tightens. Ayaka rearranges the haiku collection again, this time alphabetically, which she hates, but which signals a temporary state of reorganization. Junpei does a dust check, sweeping more than dust. He checks for bugs, for false books, for pages that don't belong. He finds nothing unusual until he opens a copy of Letters from the Mountain and sees something taped to the inside back cover, a pressed plum blossom, out of season. Ayaka stiffens. "That's the Kyoto signal," she whispers. "We only used that during the burn trials." The burn trials, a code name for a purge cycle back in 1986, when Noriko's Osaka press came under temporary suspicion, and Jiro ordered all peripheral material destroyed. The blossom meant one thing. Something from those years had survived. When Jiro returns to the shop, he listens carefully to Ayaka's update, reads the plum blossom twice, and does something no one expects. He laughs, not a loud laugh, not a cruel one, just a soft, stunned chuckle, as if someone had reminded him that he was in fact mortal. "Well," he says, "I suppose someone left a chapter untitled." He goes to the ledger, pulls out a page marked "Archived, Never Reprint." Inside, a list of names, 6 digits long, no faces, no notes, just designations from the burn trial years. He traces his finger down the page until he stops on one. 216947, Fushimi, a courier, young, exceptionally talented, She was the one who proposed hiding codes inside morning stationery. Her last known act was smuggling an entire month's worth of movement data inside a single condolence card. After that, gone. Presumed lost, but perhaps not. Jiro closes the ledger. That night he writes a letter. Not coded, not indirect, just plain language. Dear Fushimi, if you are alive, I owe you a book. The title is yours to choose. Scribbler. He folds it once, places it in a standard envelope, and slides it into a rental locker in Shimokitazawa. The key, hidden in a returned cookbook on Okinawan recipes. No rush. The right hands always find the right pages. And while all this unfolds, Masaru, the journalist, publishes a blog post. It goes unnoticed by most. Just a few hundred views. But inside the piece is a single paragraph that makes its way to Junpei's desk. Some bookstores seem to bend time. You walk in and feel like you're interrupting a whisper. But every now and then, you wonder, what if the books are reading you instead? No accusations, no names, just enough to raise a question. Jiro doesn't worry. Masaru will be handled. Not silenced, not threatened. Redirected. That's what Takahiro's best at. By the end of the week, Masaru receives a mysterious package. A vintage dictaphone, preloaded with strange, overlapping recordings of footsteps, wind, and pages turning. No voice, just ambiance. He listens to it every night. It starts to change the shape of his sleep. What's closest to Jiro now isn't paranoia, it's poetry. The poetry of knowing that the story is too big to erase and too delicate to expose. That every action now is more like editing than living. The shop stays quiet. The petals eventually crumble and are swept away, but the signal remains. The bookstore holds its breath. There's no storm, no sirens, no banging doors, no suits darkening the threshold. Just a silence that feels observed, like someone reading the shop, line by line, waiting for a misprint. Jiro senses it most at dusk, that hour when the sunlight bends through the dusty front windows and splinters into golden smears across the philosophy section. It's when the regulars thin out, and only the careful linger, the kind who spend 20 minutes flipping through one book and never buy. It's when ghosts return to browse. Ayaka notices it too. She begins changing the incense blend. No longer the light citrus she preferred during calmer years. Now it's sandalwood and cedar, darker, grounding, something used in funeral homes and shrines. The kind of scent that holds grief like a quiet hand. One afternoon, while shelving a battered copy of The Narrow Road to the Deep North, she finds a note tucked between the pages. Modern paper, typewritten. Your bookmarks are fraying. No signature, no mark. Just those 5 words. She brings it to Jiro in silence. He reads it, folds it neatly, and places it under a paperweight shaped like a crane. Then he returns to his tea. This is how they test tone, he says softly. A false whisper, a planted echo. They want to see how we react. Junpei reacts by inspecting the front windows for smudges. He finds one fingerprint too high for a child, too crooked for a casual lean. It's been cleaned, but not perfectly. He dusts it, photographs it, then wipes it clean with vinegar and cloth. Whatever they're looking for, Junpei says, they're looking gently. That's what worries them. When fire comes, it's dramatic, fast, unmistakable. But erosion is silent. And by the time you feel it, your foundations are already dust. Takahiro proposes cutting 2 courier routes. They're clean, but he calls them overexposed. Ayaka disagrees. The timing, she argues, is what matters. Not the roads, But the rhythm. Jiro listens to both, then proposes a compromise. He changes the narrative style. The next set of drop codes come wrapped in recipes, literal recipes. Miso glazed eggplant, plum wine pickles, udon variations. But each one contains subtle flourishes, imperial era kanji, misplaced seasonings, units of measurement that signal routes and times. Only the trained can cook these dishes correctly. A courier named Mika reports the first successful transfer using this new method. She delivers a battered envelope containing what looks like an old family cookbook to an elderly man seated alone in a cafe. He doesn't open it, just nods once and hands her a folded umbrella. Inside, a single strip of paper curled like a cinnamon stick. Jiro reads it that night. If the story is being watched, cook it until the page softens. He tapes it beside Masaru's earlier quote on the underside of the desk. Two authors, neither aware of each other, both writing within his margins. Here's a historical fact. In pre-modern Japan, messages were often disguised in poems and food exchanges. Political dissent traveled inside gift baskets. Protests were hidden in oblique waka. No one wanted to be a martyr. Everyone wanted to be understood. That's the lineage Jiro claims. That's the lineage now under pressure. Later that week, a storm passes through Tokyo. Not metaphor, actual rain. Torrents. The streets choke with umbrellas. The power flickers 3 times in the shop. Each time, Junpei instinctively glances toward the back shelf, where a sensitive strip of film sits in a drawer. 3 flickers? That's a predetermined signal. Someone's requesting a blind drop, meaning no courier, no contact. The package must be placed, not delivered. If retrieved, a signal will follow. If untouched, it will self-erase within 48 hours. Ayaka prepares the bundle. It's disguised as a watercolor portfolio. Inside, thin paper scrolls, hand-painted to resemble landscapes. But the ink is reactive. When exposed to breath, it reveals text. The kind of thing you can't photograph. You have to read alive. Jiro chooses the drop point, an abandoned ticket booth near the Tokyo National Museum, once used during the earliest stages of their operation. Fushimi's old route. As he hands the bundle to Takehiro, he says, "If someone comes, let them finish the sentence." Takehiro nods and vanishes into the rain. What's closest to Jiro now is not the risk, but the tone of the risk. It doesn't feel like an attack. It feels like editing. Someone is trimming his narrative, softly, patiently, waiting for him to overcorrect, to misplace a comma, to reveal a rhythm. He won't give them the satisfaction. That night, he reopens the upstairs ledger. Not the red one, the oldest one. The one bound in stitched canvas, written entirely in pencil, soft with age. He turns to a blank page and writes, "If this is the ending, it's too early. If this is the middle, we need misdirection." The next morning, a new book appears on the front table. Unmarked, no barcode, a pale yellow cover with no title. Inside, nothing but blank pages, except for the center spread. On the left, a list of Japanese punctuation marks. On the right, their supposed emotional equivalents. Uncertainty, a breath. Vulnerability. Resistance, a denial. A memory unspoken. Ayaka stares at it for a long time before whispering, "Someone's writing back." Jiro smiles faintly. Then the conversation has begun, and that's what he wanted all along. Not dominance, dialogue. The yellow book remains on the front table for exactly 5 days. Some customers thumb through it. Most don't notice it at all. But those who do tend to hesitate. They run a finger along the unmarked spine, glance at the blank pages, and either walk away quietly or buy something else entirely. as if the presence of that book makes them second-guess their own selections. Jiro watches their behavior like a scientist observing weather patterns. On the 6th day, the book vanishes. No sale, no receipt, no camera footage, just gone. That's when he knows. The dialogue isn't just beginning, it's evolving. He re-watches Masaru's interview tape. The journalist had dropped it off, unsolicited, weeks ago. In case you ever want to hear yourself say nothing, he joked. Jiro plays it late at night, letting the static and low hum of cassette hiss fill the space between his thoughts. There's a moment, 15 minutes in, where the camera shifts slightly. Not a deliberate pan, a flinch, as if someone nudged the tripod. Rewatching it frame by frame, Jiro spots something he missed the first time. A reflection, barely visible. A figure in the convex surface of the brass teapot he kept on the table. The shape isn't Masaru. Too tall. Different stance. Leaning. Observing. Someone else was there. Someone framing the frame. Junpei confirms the finding. Pulls the original cassette apart to search for any added magnetic cues, but finds nothing. If this was tampered with, he mutters. They did it the old way, in the lens. Ayaka calls it a shadow edit, a term Jiro hadn't heard since the early 80s, when Noriko first described the idea of inserting misinformation, not through lies, but through subtle alterations of what was already true. You don't change the story. You shift the camera angle. This is where the real threat lives now. Not in raids or arrests, but reinterpretation. So Jiro reverts to first principles. He stops using codes entirely for a week, orders everything spoken, handwritten, and destroyed by sundown. No digital, no ink that survives the night. He calls this period the blackout stanza. Only 3 people know it's happening. Courier traffic continues, but every delivery is stripped of metaphor. No recipes, no pedal signals. Just content, quietly moved. The poetry will return later. During this week, Kojin Bunko feels colder. Not literally. The heater still hums, the tea still steams, but emotionally. The air holds fewer syllables, and yet, in that silence, something returns. Fushimi. She doesn't walk in. She doesn't knock. She doesn't need to. She leaves a book in the returns box. No title. No author. Inside, a piece of thread sewn across the spine with red wax on both ends. Jiro breaks the wax that night. Inside is a story, fictionalized, but unmistakably hers. It tells of a courier who fakes her own arrest to escape a collapsing network, who buries herself under a fake name in a quiet coastal town, writing grocery lists in cipher and baking secrets into bread, who never meant to return, but started seeing books from her old world showing up in stranger hands, so she reached out, not with hope, but with curiosity. Ayaka reads the manuscript aloud, voice low, eyes misting by the 5th page. When she finishes, Jiro simply says, "Tell Noriko to prepare a new press. Call it the seagrass line, because that's the detail Fushimi left in her text. A subtle reference to a type of coastal grass used for thatched roofing in her region. No one but Jiro would have caught it. The seagrass line becomes a resurrection branch. A small, low-volume imprint used for short-term messages and minor shipments. No structure, no hierarchy. Just a pulse. A sign that ghosts can write again. Here's a historical fact. During the Edo period, couriers used coastal fishing routes to smuggle information under the guise of seafood delivery. They referred to it as Nami no Kaze, wind over the waves. No records, just rhythm. Jiro honors that. He sends back a reply to Fushimi through a customer satisfaction card tucked in a travel journal. The journal is left in a guest house in Niigata. The card reads, "The shoreline held. Let the waves edit the next draft." Meanwhile, Masaru publishes again. Not a full article this time, just a photo. Blurry, black and white. Captioned, "Some doors are read more than they are opened." It shows the front of Kojin Bunko, slightly out of focus, caught in mid-twilight. A single figure visible inside, reaching for a book that doesn't seem to be there. Takahiro intercepts the metadata. Timestamp, device ID, upload route. It wasn't Masaru's. Someone submitted the image to his anonymous tip form. Someone using a routing method linked to older Intelligence Bureau equipment. Masaru's not the problem. He's the project. Jiro changes course. He writes Masaru a letter. Handwritten. No codes. "Dear Mr. Masaru, you're chasing a story, but you're also writing one. If you'd like to know the difference, come on Wednesday. Not to interview, to read. Choose any book, but finish it in the shop. The management." He sends it via courier disguised as a publisher intern delivering a rejection slip. That Wednesday, Masaru arrives at 3:12 p.m. He doesn't bring a recorder. He doesn't bring a notebook. He selects a book of post-war poetry and sits in the corner. Reads for 3 hours. Says nothing. Orders no tea. Doesn't even touch his phone. When he leaves, he places the book gently on the counter and says, "I think I understand why this place isn't in any guidebook." Jiro nods. Later, when Ayaka checks the book, she finds something tucked between the pages. A sentence. Torn from a magazine article. Highlighted in red ink. The first sign of understanding is silence. Many people still think Jiro's empire had no rivals because it was too discreet, too invisible. But that's not it. The empire survived because it trained its readers. It didn't just move product. It moved perception. It taught its couriers to read air, to listen to absence, to know that some punctuation marks mean watch this space. What's closest to Jiro now isn't power. It's presence, the sense that the story is aware of itself, that somewhere, out in the tangle of lanes and train lines and empty vending machine alleys, a character is being written, slowly, carefully, and one day, that character may walk in, buy a paperback, and change everything. Until then, the shop stays open, just slightly longer than it should. The end of the year approaches, though time moves strangely inside Kojin Bunko. The shop doesn't do sales. No holiday garlands. Just a modest hand-lettered sign at the door that reads, "Books don't know it's December. Neither should we." Outside, Tokyo speeds up. The year-end rush spills into train platforms and coffee counters. Inside, everything remains the same. Until it doesn't. On the last Monday of the month, a delivery arrives. Not by courier, not through the usual drop channels. A regular postal package. Brown, unremarkable, neatly tied with twine. No return address. Jiro opens it slowly, blade steady. Inside, a book. Old, Japanese binding. Fabric cover frayed at the edges. It smells of smoke. Not fresh, not acrid, but deep, like something long extinguished. Inside the cover, a single line is written in tight, upright script. This copy was never borrowed. There are no other markings, no codes, no annotations. Jiro closes the book, turns it over. The title, barely legible in fading ink, The Reader's Shadow. He knows that name. It was the title of an abandoned manuscript from the earliest days of the network, a prototype codebook intended for training field couriers. Only 2 copies ever existed. One was destroyed during the burn trials, and the other, lost. Until now, he calls for Ayaka and Takahiro, shows them the book. Neither speaks for a full minute. Junpei arrives later, opens the cover, and confirms. It's authentic. The paper grain matches the Osaka press, circa 1983. There are faint indentations where someone once wrote in pencil, then erased. He lifts a few with a soft lead stick. Coordinates, timetables, code names from the past. This isn't just a relic, it's a breach. If someone outside the circle has held this book, it means the old playbook has been exposed. The dead language of their origins, decades buried, has been studied. This is the part, Ayaka says, where the story gets revised by another author. Jiro doesn't disagree. He spends the next day copying the contents by hand into a fresh ledger, annotating everything, inserting modern equivalents beside outdated terms. It's not just transcription, it's translation, old silence into new context. As he works, the city outside prepares for the new year. Stores hang paper lanterns, temple bells are tested, fireworks rehearsed quietly in the bay. But inside the shop, there's only one sound: the scratching of pencil against paper, deliberate and slow. Later that night, Junpei reviews courier activity and flags something odd. A small handoff in Shinokubo, routine, low volume, resulted in a shadow tale. One of the newer couriers, Riko, noticed she was followed by a man in a black cap who kept adjusting his left shoe. The movement didn't seem like a habit. It seemed like a signal. Jiro listens carefully. "That's an old trick," he mutters. "We used to use heel taps to communicate across pagodas." He pulls a book from the travel shelf. Pilgrim Codes and Temple Scripts. Page 94. Diagrams of foot positions used by monks in the Edo period to signal danger, guidance, or withdrawal during silent retreats. What was once spiritual is now surveillance. Ayaka proposes suspending all movement through the north-central line. Jiro disagrees. "No, we rewrite it instead." He sits with a map of Tokyo and marks a series of temples, some active, some ruins, some converted to parking structures. Then he speaks quietly. If they're using pilgrimage methods, then they understand narrative. That means we can mislead them if we give them a better story. Thus begins the false pilgrimage. 5 couriers, dressed as university students completing a thesis on urban religious heritage, begin walking specific routes. Each carries a different book marked with faux religious commentary. Each visit leaves behind a token, calligraphy scrolls, wax-sealed envelopes, a folded pamphlet titled Echoes of the Cloistered City. Inside each pamphlet, absolutely nothing, but the pattern tells a story, one that leads away from Kojin Bunko, toward a fictional operation centered in a forgotten bathhouse in Kita Ward. A complete fabrication, right down to false ledgers planted inside a rented locker, and an old man hired to sit and nod if anyone asks him about the manuscripts. Jiro names the campaign Misdirection by Incense because every drop includes a subtle scent, one designed to match the new story. Not sandalwood, not cedar, but kodoko, a rare blend used in imperial court poetry readings. Expensive, overly formal, too distinct for normal trade. Only someone reading deeply would notice, and someone does. At 4:43 p.m. on a Wednesday, a man enters the shop. He doesn't browse, doesn't pretend, just walks to the counter and says, "I smelled a lie, and I followed it." Jiro doesn't flinch. He simply replies, "And did the lie ask for you?" The man smirks, places a wrapped gift on the counter. "It's a return," he says. "I never liked footnotes." Then he leaves. Inside the package, a collection of letters once presumed lost. Reports from early Osaka runs. Pages written by couriers believed long dead. Some still breathing. Some gone. One, signed Fushimi, dated only 2 months ago. Ayaka reads each one like a mourner listening for a heartbeat. They're not dangerous, but they're vulnerable. Stories once sealed, now exposed to air. Jiro doesn't panic. He curates. That night, He lights 3 sticks of incense, one for memory, one for misdirection, one for muting. Then he begins compiling a new codebook. This time not for couriers, but for readers, those who've picked up the wrong book, those who found a pamphlet and couldn't forget it, those who think Kojin Bunko is just a sleepy shop with a peculiar smell and a gentle old man. The codebook will teach them how to read, and more importantly, how not to. It begins with a warning. If you've found this by accident, close it. If you've read past this line, you were always meant to. Many people still think Jiro's network was about control, secrecy, precision, but they miss the simplest truth. It was about editing the reader, 1 comma at a time. The first print run of the new codebook is just 12 copies. They're slim, bound in rough linen with stitched spines and blank covers, unassuming enough to vanish on any bookshelf, but unmistakable to the trained eye. Inside, each page contains 1 lesson, 1 metaphor, 1 invitation. Don't search for meaning in the margins. Sometimes the story is the paper. If the page repeats, it's asking you to forget. Silence is not absence, it is arrangement. Jiro writes all 12 by hand. No type, no copies. He works through the night, pausing only to boil water or adjust the cat's curled position on his lap. His handwriting is slower now, but careful, like he's leaving instructions for a reader he'll never meet, but already trusts. Each copy is destined for a different location, one tucked into a used bookstore in Shimane, one slipped between architecture books in a university library, one sealed inside a violin case and left with an old contact in Nagasaki. The last copy stays at Kojin Bunko. He labels it index not finalized. Meanwhile, across the network, something quiet begins to change. Couriers start reporting moments, not full breaches, not failures, but impressions, glimpses of people who seem to know just a little too much. A man asking a courier about a bookstore without a register. A woman returning a book she never borrowed, then walking away before her change is offered. A pair of teenagers whispering in train stations about a story that reads them back. Junpei assembles a sketch from these scattered accounts. The reader is spreading. Not the operation, not the product, but the myth. Ayaka calls it the echo protocol, a phase of narrative where you're no longer telling the story. You're listening to its retellings. You're tracking not the facts, but the interpretations. Jiro isn't alarmed. He's amused, because this is exactly what he hoped for. Back when the first coded receipt left the register. Back when the cat meowed at the wrong moment. Back when Fushimi wrote her report on funeral paper, and someone thought it was a poem. He didn't build a business. He seeded a fable, and now it's growing roots in places he's never set foot. Still, the network adjusts. Junpei installs mirrors in the aisles again, not for security, but angle memory. Their reflections distort just enough to force pattern breakers to reveal themselves. Ayaka updates the haiku-based cipher, replacing all classical references with modern slang that sounds like poetry but reads like scheduling. One new haiku in particular begins circulating quietly among select couriers. The train sleeps too loud. Ice cubes melt in uniform. Someone wrote this stop. It looks harmless. Sounds poetic. But to those trained, it means run at staggered intervals. Avoid uniformed contacts. This checkpoint has been edited. Here's a historical fact. In the late 80s, Tokyo's underworld operations often used urban legend as camouflage. Rumors of cursed subway lines, forgotten film reels, and haunted vending machines were repurposed to mask real activity. Jiro didn't invent this tactic. He refined it. By cloaking his network in whispers, he removed the need for protection. Because who investigates a ghost? But the ghost theory has limits. One night, a man enters the shop, middle-aged, neatly dressed, no umbrella despite the rain. He walks straight to the counter and places a single object in front of Jiro. A flash drive. No label, just black plastic. Small, too modern. Jiro doesn't touch it. The man speaks softly. It contains a list of books. What kind of books? Jiro asks. The man tilts his head. Ones that end your version of the story. A pause. Then, as if rehearsed. You may want to edit your punctuation. He leaves. No purchase, no name. That night, Jiro plugs the flash drive into an isolated off-grid machine kept for moments like this. No network, no operating system. Just a reader and a blank environment. The contents? A spreadsheet, rows of titles, ISBNs, shelf locations, shipping data. At first glance, meaningless. But then Jiro sees the pattern. They're his books, not ones sold, but ones placed. Books seeded with signals. Books used in operations going back over a decade. Even ones he thought had been destroyed. All logged, all tracked. He scrolls to the bottom. A final note. Some readers take notes. Some memorize. Some transcribe the whole library. He removes the drive, burns it, stares at the smoke until the room clears. Ayaka finds him there, seated on the floor. Someone's reading us, he says. She kneels beside him. Can they write? Jiro thinks for a moment. Not yet. But they want co-authorship. The difference between surveillance and dialogue is thin, a watcher observes. A reader responds. Jiro decides it's time to change the tempo. He issues a new instruction, one the network hasn't seen in years. Scatterplot protocol. It means disassemble existing routes, break the narrative into pieces, let the story go non-linear. Suddenly, couriers don't just drop packages, they leave half-codes in teacups. Signals are embedded in misquoted Shakespeare lines. One courier reports a contact asking, "Did the bookstore ever sell sunflowers?" Which translates to, "The archive is leaking. Cover it with metaphor." Jiro reworks the entire ledger architecture, converts it into a deck of index cards shuffled each morning by Junpei and restacked based on weather, mood, and newspaper headlines. The data still exists, but now it breathes. This is how it has to be, because if the reader is awake, you don't close the book. You write faster. What's closest to Jiro now isn't his control over the story, but the fact that it continues despite him. And in that, there's comfort. He walks through the shop just before midnight, turns off each light, closes each ledger, touches the spine of each planted volume like checking a child's pulse. The final light he switches off is not a bulb. It's a candle in the back room, burning beside a line written on the wall years ago. Books can't vanish, but they can whisper themselves blank. He lets it flicker, then extinguishes it with a breath. By the start of January, Tokyo feels quieter, but not calm. It's a different kind of hush. Less a stillness, more a surveillance. The city's rhythms are intact. Trains run, convenience stores hum, traffic lights blink through cold mist. But beneath it all is the awareness of watching. Kojin Bunko feels it too. A customer walks in and asks casually if there's a copy of The Book That Disappeared. There is no such book, not officially. But the phrase triggers a memory buried in Jiro's old red ledger, a theoretical title once used as a test, an imaginary volume mentioned in passing during courier interviews to see who was actually paying attention. He hadn't spoken it aloud in over 10 years. Jiro answers calmly, out of stock. The customer nods and leaves. No purchase, no eye contact. Ayaka tracks him to a bookstore in Nakano the next day, watches him browse for 30 minutes, then pay cash for a novel about mountain climbing. Inside the book, nothing unusual, until page 76, where a corner has been torn off at a precise diagonal, matching the shape of a signal Jiro used only once, during the aborted Hakata route in 1986. Someone isn't just watching the story, they're reprinting it. Junpei suggests erasing everything, shutting it down, blanketing the whole network in silence for a full season. But Jiro disagrees. Silence doesn't stop readers, he says. It just dares them to interpret louder. Instead, he begins publishing. Under a pen name he hasn't used since before the bookstore had walls. Shimada M. Short fiction. Published in an obscure literary magazine with a circulation of less than 500. The stories are abstract, atmospheric, often just fragments. One's about a man who begins finding pieces of his childhood home inside different subway lockers. Another about a woman who forgets a language no one else remembers speaking. Each one contains coded edits, not instructions, corrections. They suggest false memories, conflicting details, rearranged truths. These aren't guides for the network. They're interruptions for whoever's reconstructing it from the outside. Jiro calls this maneuver narrative fogging. By flooding the potential reader with too much plausible backstory, he distorts the coherence of any single version, a kind of literary countermeasure, not disinformation, fictional misalignment. It works for a while. Courier confusion increases, yes, but so does observer uncertainty. Jiro can feel it in the quiet spaces again, the subtle lag in surveillance, the wrong people showing up at the wrong bookstores, the pauses growing longer between incidents. Ayaka starts dreaming again. She wakes one morning and tells Jiro she saw Fushimi sitting in the back of the shop, writing with a brush made of smoke. The words disappeared as soon as they hit the page, but the air smelled like plum wine. Maybe she's trying to erase us, Ayaka says, to protect us. Jiro just nods. Or maybe she's writing the version we never dared. Meanwhile, Masaru publishes another blog post. This one is different. Not investigative, not poetic. It's a review of The Reader's Shadow. He never received a copy. Jiro never gave him one, but someone did. The blog post is brief and ends with a quote. I thought I was reading a guide to survival. Turned out I was reading someone's obituary written a page too early. The post goes viral in small literary circles. Writers begin emailing Masaru, asking if the book is real. He never confirms, but he never denies it either. And so, once again, the myth thickens. Jiro uses the opportunity. He begins sending out false editions of The Reader's Shadow, each copy slightly altered. Some with chapters removed, some with extra pages that loop back to earlier ones. Some contain entire stories folded into the margins, stories that appear to end and begin with the same sentence. He stepped out of the bookstore and remembered he had never entered. Here's a historical fact. The Tokugawa shogunate once banned an entire genre of poetry because it was too recursive. It caused readers to spend days circling the same stanzas, trying to find where the meaning actually began. They called it mad verse. It wasn't madness, it was design. Jiro knows this. He makes mad books. One of the fake editions is left at a cafe in Koenji. 3 days later, a local priest mentions to Junpei that someone came to confession, not for sins, but for translations. They kept whispering, I think I misunderstood the ending. Back in Kojin Bunko, a delivery arrives, a box, wrapped in plain paper, no postage. Inside, a single item, a book-shaped object, hand-carved from wood, smooth, clean, sealed with lacquer, burned into the front cover. Author unknown. Jiro holds it for a long time. Then he opens the ledger, the black one, the one he never lets anyone else touch. And he adds a new entry. Reader 0. They've stopped looking for product. They're reading for authorship. That's the danger now. The Empire isn't being hunted for its goods. It's being studied for its style, which means it's time to accelerate the endgame. Jiro begins gathering the old guards, not just Takahiro, Junpei, Ayaka, but the whisperers, the bookmarks, the vanished. Each receives a simple letter, handwritten and unsigned. The manuscript is nearing final draft. Return if you still want to edit. Leave it be if your version has already ended. No deadline, no location, just a message. Then, on the 7th day, Kojin Bunko changes, subtly. The lighting, the shelving, the placement of the incense bowls. To the regulars, nothing's different. But to those who knew, really knew, the shop has entered pre-publication mode. Final layout, last pass, proofing. Ayaka begins binding blank notebooks again. She's not told why. She doesn't ask. But each time she ties the thread, her hands shake slightly. Not with fear, with reverence. Takahiro starts burning old maps, one corner at a time. He doesn't even watch them crumble. And Jiro? He writes one final codebook. Not for couriers, not for readers, for the next author, whoever survives this version. Because this story is no longer his to end, it's only his to complete. There is something sacred about final edits, not the kind done in haste, with red pens and looming deadlines, but the quieter ones, the edits made after you know the shape of the thing, when each sentence breathes on its own. You're not correcting anymore. You're listening for rhythm, for misalignment, for that one comma that sounds too loud in the quiet. Kojin Bunko moves like this now. Every shelf, every ledger, every sideways glance from the cat is part of that final cadence. Not tension, tempo. A narrative slowly stitching its last act together. And on the 6th evening of this rhythm, someone returns. Fushimi. No announcement, no prelude. Just the soft chime of the door and her silhouette framed against the blue-gray dusk. Older, yes, but not fragile. She walks with the calm of someone who has survived her own obituary. Ayaka sees her first and freezes mid-step. The ceramic teacup she's holding nearly slips. Fushimi offers a half-smile, sets a small wooden box on the counter and says, "I brought something I never finished hiding." Jiro appears behind the shelves almost immediately. He doesn't speak. He simply nods toward the back room. Fushimi follows. The wooden box contains 3 items. A courier ledger from 1987, sealed shut with wax, untouched for nearly 2 decades. A blank book, except for the first line. They will think we built a system, but we built a sentence. A photo. It's the photo that stuns Ayaka most. Not because of what it shows. Just 3 people sitting on crates in what looks like an old train yard. But because all 3 are alive. People they thought had vanished. One presumed dead, one erased, one exiled, and all 3 are smiling. That night, the upstairs room becomes a command post. Not in the militaristic sense, but in the editorial one. Notebooks spread, ink dried, memories gently challenged. Takahiro asks the first hard question. What if we're not being read anymore? Jiro, without looking up, answers, then we've become subtext, which means we've already won, but still. The fact remains. The Watchers have evolved. The story has leaked beyond its authors. False copies, half-memories, reinterpretations. The risk isn't arrest. It's corruption, and that's harder to fight. So Jiro proposes a final act, not a shutdown, not an escape. A publication, not literal, of course. No bestseller launch, no newspaper serial, but a controlled release. A final archive drop of the network's core materials, dressed entirely as fiction. So layered, so stylized, so poetic, that no reader could ever prove anything real. A bedtime story for the paranoid. The structure would be recursive, fragmented, voices layered, names changed, then changed back, then erased. Stories nested inside misdirection. A story about a bookstore that never existed, in a city too real to be invented, told by an author who left no name. Who's the narrator? Ayaka asks. Jiro shrugs. We all are. They title the project The Bookstore Without Receipts. Over the next 2 weeks, the shop becomes a scriptorium. Junpei compiles timelines. Ayaka drafts metaphor maps, symbols used in the network, and their plausible literary reinterpretations. Takahiro writes dialogue samples for moments that never happened but feel like they should have. Fushimi contributes one short chapter, an imagined conversation between a courier and a dying tree. Here's an excerpt. Courier. Will they remember the roots? Tree. Not exactly, but they'll know someone walked here with care. Courier. Is that enough? Tree. For roots, yes. Jiro does not write a chapter. Instead, he curates. He sequences, orders, reverses, omits. He makes the story unreadable to anyone who wants only truth, but intoxicating to anyone who wants to believe. Here's a historical fact. The earliest ninja manuals in Japan were not tactical books. They were folk tales, stories written to confuse, charm, or warn. The lessons weren't in the literal text, but in the ways the text avoided being literal. Jiro understands this deeply. He builds the archive the same way. On the final night, they bind 12 copies of the manuscript. Each is sealed in a different object. A thermos, a cassette case, a hollow dictionary, a child's storybook, an abandoned purse. These are sent out through the network, quietly, respectfully, like scattering ashes over sacred ground. One copy stays behind. It's hidden behind the fiction shelf, wrapped in an old coat once worn by a courier who wrote only in pencil. What's closest to Jiro now is the weight, not of fear, but of intent. The feeling that every step they've taken, every metaphor passed hand to hand, has led to this moment. Not to reveal the story, but to let it become legend. Ayaka stands in the back room the next morning and asks, "Do we still run routes?" Jiro answers without looking up. "We let the story travel itself now." A week later, Masaru publishes one last post. Just an image. The front of Kojin Bunko, taken at dusk, the windows lit softly from within. No caption, just a tag. Some stories don't want to be solved. The comments are quiet, poetic. Someone writes, "I walked past that bookstore once. Didn't go in. Still think about it." Someone else replies, "I think I dreamed it." That night, for the first time in years, Jiro doesn't write in the ledger. He closes it, slides it beneath the floorboards, and just before blowing out the candle, he whispers, "The book is finished. Let the margins write from here." The margins, once quiet, once merely space, begin to hum. It starts with coincidence. A book left behind on a park bench in Nakameguro turns up in a second-hand shop in Sapporo 3 days later. Inside, a folded train ticket dated 10 years into the future. Beneath it, one line scrawled in faint pencil. "We never planned the echo. It learned to reply." Elsewhere, a university student posts a photo online of a receipt she found tucked in the sleeve of an old kimono at a thrift market in Fukuoka. The receipt is blank, save for one word. Footnote. The post gets 4 likes. One comment, then disappears. Jiro doesn't see these ripples. Not directly, but Takahiro does. Ayaka does. Even Junpei, who now works afternoons tending the teacups more than the ledgers, notices customers browsing slower, like the air itself is inviting hesitation. The city hasn't gone quiet. It's gone readable. Kojin Bunko changes again. The shop now carries more blank journals than printed books. When customers ask about their purpose, Ayaka simply says, "For what hasn't been remembered yet." Some buy them. Most just touch them and leave. One man asks if he can leave something behind. A letter. Ayaka nods and gestures to a repurposed donation box in the corner. It's labeled "Forgotten Lines to be filed when needed." Inside it, slips of poetry begin to appear. He left me a comma, but I needed a pause. The rain in Shinjuku smells like footnotes now. My mother used to say paper listens longer than people. Jiro reads them late at night. Doesn't sort them. Doesn't interpret. Just keeps them. These are not messages to be deciphered. These are resonances. The myth has crossed its final threshold. Here's a historical fact. In pre-Meiji Japan, there was a custom called kakure uta, hidden songs. Messages embedded in melodies passed through generations, surviving not in meaning, but in mood. You couldn't always translate them, but you could feel when you were inside one. Jiro's empire has become a kakure uta. Even the watchers no longer know what they're watching. Masaru vanishes from the digital scene. His blog is archived, but dormant. A friend posts that he left Tokyo to chase a mountain that only appears in certain poems. No one knows what that means, but everyone believes it. Meanwhile, the final ledger, Jiro's unwritten one, is being filled by strangers. Someone leaves a scroll on the stoop, unsealed, inked with this: "I found the bookstore, but the door was me." Junpei smiles when he reads it. "I think we've been published," he says. Fushimi, who's remained upstairs since her return, now descends only at night. She sharpens pencils, sifts through postcards, draws maps of cities that haven't been built yet. When Ayaka asks what she's working on, Fushimi replies, "Sequel." Takahiro, meanwhile, begins teaching, quietly. A group of 4. In the evenings, in a different cafe every week. He teaches them how to read margins, how to breathe before turning a page, how to know when a book is lying just a little. He never calls it training. He calls it editing aloud. Jiro watches all this unfold with a soft, distant smile. He's not orchestrating anymore. He's witnessing, because stories, once strong enough, begin to self-correct. The final proof arrives one night at closing. An elderly woman enters the shop carrying nothing but a bag of persimmons and a worn-out sandal. She says she used to be part of a courier network long ago, though she no longer remembers what she delivered. Just that she carried it like it mattered. Jiro serves her tea. She doesn't speak for 10 minutes. Then she asks, "Do the books still ask questions?" He answers, "Only the ones you've been avoiding." She laughs, leaves one persimmon on the counter, then walks out. Ayaka slices the fruit in half and finds, lodged gently in its center, a page torn from a very old ledger. The ink has faded, but Jiro reads the handwriting instantly. It's his. From the earliest days, a practice sentence: build something quiet, let it survive louder than you. He holds it like you would a message from your younger self, not with sentimentality, but with careful correction. He doesn't file it. He doesn't burn it. He just folds it back into the persimmon skin and buries it in the garden pot beside the shop's rear door. Let it compost. Let it root. That night, Kojin Bunko dims its lights earlier than usual. Jiro doesn't stay upstairs. He walks the aisles one last time, running his fingers over the shelves, not to check for dust, but to thank them. Each book a vessel, each silence a page, each echo now writing on its own. He blows out the last candle, and for once doesn't write anything down, because some endings don't require punctuation. They just require a breath, then darkness, then maybe, if the story wants, another chapter. The next morning, the store opens itself. No one turns the key. No one lifts the shutter. But when Ayaka arrives, wind-chapped and early, the door is already unlocked. The bell chimes, soft, slow, like it had been waiting to be heard again. She steps inside and finds the shop exactly as they left it. Only one thing is different. A book sits on the counter, new, untitled, still warm to the touch, as if freshly pressed, though no one used the binding tools that night. It has no barcode, no author. Inside, the pages are blank, except for page 7. One line: "This is the chapter they wrote without ink." She carries it to Jiro, who is already seated in the upstairs room, staring into a teacup like it's reading him back. "It appeared," she says. He nods, doesn't touch it, just gestures for her to keep it. "That one's not mine anymore," he says. "It's communal now." Outside, the first snow of the year begins to fall. Jiro watches it drift across the sill, slow and precise, like it knows how many stories have passed beneath this roof. That afternoon, a child enters the store, maybe 8 years old, muffled in a red scarf. He doesn't browse, doesn't speak, just walks up to the register and sets down a postcard, drawn in crayon, a picture of a building with 3 crooked windows and 1 glowing lamp. The caption, "The place where my dreams stop for tea." Ayaka thanks him. He bows, leaves. Takahiro, watching from the poetry section, murmurs, "We didn't write that." Fushimi replies from the stairwell, "Not directly." And they all know what she means. The myth has metastasized, not into danger, but into inheritance. It no longer needs training or transaction. It lives in atmosphere now, in the smell of old paper, in the hush before a good sentence lands, in the rhythm of page turning when the shop is otherwise empty. Jiro begins sleeping earlier, not because he's tired, but because he wants to wake for the right moments. The new authors are arriving, young, half-formed, brilliant in the way unsupervised ideas often are. He meets them occasionally, not with tests or riddles, just questions. "What book isn't written yet? What silence haven't you answered? What sentence do you think watches you back?" One answers, "The sentence I haven't earned yet." Jiro bows. The boy is 12. Meanwhile, the seagrass line has gone completely dark, deliberately. Noriko's final transmission was a map of Okinawan winds overlaid with haiku about misdirection. Junpei decodes it and finds the instructions. Dissolve everything, scatter the inks, leave only edible paper in circulation. They've complied. It's not a shutdown. It's a ritual exit. Like folding a kimono before storing it away for 100 years. Here's a historical fact. The Japanese term mono no aware refers to the bittersweetness of passing things, not just sadness, but the beauty in their impermanence. Jiro embodies this now. He stops tracking time. The ledger remains closed. He spends his mornings dusting books no one will buy and his afternoons reading books no one wrote. At least, not out loud. Ayaka builds a new shelving system. She labels the sections with emotional states instead of genres. Regret, short stories. Reconciliation, letters. Uncertainty, blank pages. Stillness. Philosophy, mostly. Soft departures, you'll know. Customers don't question it. They just find what they didn't know they were missing. Takahiro stops carrying a phone. Instead, he uses a fountain pen and a pocket notebook with the word drafts embossed in gold. He writes only when it rains. No one's asked why. Everyone understands. Fushimi begins recording herself reading nonsense, not gibberish, just grammarless phrases meant to sound like memories. She calls it oral negative space. One of the tapes ends up in a thrift store in Kyoto. Another in the seat-back pocket of a ferry bound for Hokkaido. The third, left in the shop bathroom, tucked behind the mirror. It plays itself at night, low volume, indistinct. Something like, "Do you remember when fiction watched us sleep?" They all hear it eventually, and no one dares turn it off. At month's end, someone leaves a letter in the garden pot where Jiro buried the persimmon skin. The handwriting is juvenile, the grammar imperfect. It reads, "Dear bookstore, I had a dream I read a book with no words, but it still told me everything. I woke up crying. Thank you for lending it to me. A reader without a card." Jiro reads it, folds it, places it between pages 64 and 65 of Silence by Endo Shusaku, then returns the book to the shelf, not for safekeeping, for circulation, because at this point, the story doesn't belong to anyone. It is a weather pattern now, a rumor with structure, a plot line someone breathes in and never fully exhales. What's closest to Jiro now isn't the network, or the codes, or the shop. It's the simple fact that stories, like seeds, don't end when they're planted. They begin only after you walk away. And so, that evening, he steps outside. No coat, no notebook, just the wind at his back and the whisper of pages arranging themselves in the dark behind him. He doesn't lock the door. He doesn't need to, because some bookstores don't close. They just become harder to find. The shop remains, but not as it was. It pulses now, like breath. There are days it seems open before anyone arrives. The lamp's already lit, the kettle just beginning to murmur. Other days, visitors find the door locked, though no one remembers turning the key. Kojin Banko exists less as a business and more as an atmosphere. Something ambient, something suggested. And Jiro, he walks through alleyways mapped long ago in someone else's handwriting. Past telephone poles where secret symbols used to be scratched, half erased by rain and time. He doesn't follow a route now. He listens. The city speaks softly to those who've left instructions in its margins. One morning he ends up in Ueno Park. Cherry blossoms are just beginning to swell, not yet pink, but promising. A bench waits. A pigeon lands. A man approaches, mid-30s, awkward. He wears the look of someone who isn't sure if this is real. He sits beside Jiro and says, "You left something." Jiro glances sideways. The man produces a ledger, hand-bound, familiar thread. It's labeled Kojin Bunko, uncorrected proof. "I found it," the man says, "in a second-hand shop in Yokohama. I read it, thought it was fiction, but then..." He trails off, but his eyes say it all. Jiro nods. "And what did you do next?" "I copied it," the man whispers, word for word. "Then I changed the names, made it mine. I thought I was plagiarizing, but now I'm not sure who wrote what." "You did," Jiro says, "every time." The man laughs, a little too fast, a little too grateful. He leaves the ledger on the bench and disappears into the walking crowd. Lighter now. Jiro doesn't pick up the ledger. He doesn't need to. The words will find where they're supposed to go. Back at Kojin Bunko, the shop has new customers. Not readers, not yet. Authors, young ones, strange ones. Some who write backwards, some who write in silence. One girl leaves behind a single scrap of rice paper with a sentence in lemon juice. This story only breathes when forgotten. Ayaka finds it when the sun hits just right. She smiles, files it between the pages of a romance novel no one has touched in years. Takahiro begins writing letters to people who haven't entered the shop yet. He leaves them behind books, slips them between floorboards, sometimes hands one to a stranger on the train. The letters don't say much, just a phrase or a sentence. "It's your turn to narrate. This comma was waiting for you. If you pause here, the next sentence finds you." And somehow, they always do. Fushimi has taken to sitting at the back with an old cassette player, rewinding and playing the same 6 seconds over and over. It's a whisper. Hard to catch. Ayaka once caught a piece of it, and not a message, just a melody too shy to finish. She lets it loop. Some customers hear it, ask what it is. She just says, "An ellipsis in audio. Here's a historical fact. During the Edo period, there were storytellers who never ended their tales. They'd stop mid-climax, rise from the mat, bow, and leave. The point wasn't resolution. It was inheritance. The listener was meant to carry the ending forward, unfinished." Kojin Bunko has become that kind of storyteller. Jiro now spends most of his time in a park near the river. Sometimes he sketches floor plans of bookstores that don't exist. Other times he imagines what a story might sound like if told entirely through the order of its chapter titles. He mails these musings to no one, just seals them in envelopes and drops them in mailboxes. No addresses, no stamps, just words folded into trust. One evening, as the light dims and the shadows grow kind, Ayaka finds a book on the counter. One she didn't shelve, one no supplier sent. Its title, Margins of Memory. The author is unnamed. Inside, the chapters are out of order. Paragraphs begin mid-thought. One page is entirely blank, but smells faintly of matcha. Another includes a sketch of the Kojin Bunko front door. Slightly ajar, she brings it to Jiro. He looks at it for a long time, then says, "It started." "What has?" "The sequel. Not written by him, not by them, but by whoever watched closely enough, listened softly enough, paused when the story hesitated, because at this point, the myth is generative. It doesn't just echo, it evolves. It doesn't need protection anymore. It needs readers willing to forget the origin, willing to believe the bookstore always existed, willing to add one more sentence before the end. That night, Jiro writes nothing. He just closes his eyes and mouths one final phrase, not meant for the record. "Let them misremember me beautifully." Morning arrives with a whisper. The sky over Tokyo is pewter. That soft gray that seems to quiet every rooftop and hush the birds. The city moves, but slower. Like it too has fallen under the spell of a story nearly finished. Kojin Bunko's sign sways gently in the breeze but doesn't creak. Even the wind knows this is a place that respects silences. Inside, the air smells like cedar, ink, and the last line of a long book. Ayaka is shelving a new box of blank notebooks when she finds a folded note between them. No handwriting, just an embossed stamp in the corner. "Dinar." She shows it to Takahiro, who exhales through his teeth. "Do not reshelve," he murmurs. "Haven't seen that since the Kyoto reverberation." It's an old code, meaning something has reached its final form. No edits, no transfers, no reprints. The story must now stand as is wherever it lands. Ayaka glances around the shop. There's no obvious candidate. But when she pulls back the curtain to the reading nook, she sees a child curled up with a thick, weathered volume, reading like she's trying to learn the world's true shape before dinner. The cover reads, "Instructions for the reader who doesn't know they're reading." Ayaka says nothing, just closes the curtain again. That same afternoon, Jiro receives a letter, not by mail. It's hand-delivered by a man in a suit too crisp for his smile, who says only, "From someone who prefers myth over memory." The letter is printed on translucent paper, the text barely visible unless held to light. "You stopped the network just in time, or maybe too late. Either way, it's beautiful. I'm writing this not to ask questions, but to thank you for not answering the ones I didn't ask." There's no signature, but there's a line Jiro recognizes, an inside phrase from a courier long vanished, used only once in a forgotten alley south of Sendagaya. The shadow isn't cast by the lamplight. It's written into the bulb. Jiro folds the letter, places it into the spine gap of an old poetry anthology, and leaves it shelved between desire and departure. Here's a historical fact. During the Heian era, poets would sometimes leave verses on floating lanterns, hoping a stranger downstream might complete the poem. Most were never answered. The silence became the last line. That's what Jiro's legacy feels like now. A shop, a sentence, a lantern drifting gently toward whoever's next. Takahiro begins painting the shutters, not over them, but within them, layering symbols beneath the existing grain. Not visible unless the light hits from just the right side. Shapes that mimic punctuation marks, kanji radicals, old courier glyphs. He calls it typographic weathering. Ayaka asks why. He replies, "For the wind, if it ever wants to read." Masaru, though long gone from the digital world, is spotted once in Hachioji, buying paper. Plain, cream, unlined. The vendor says he paid in exact coins, left a scrap of haiku behind. Pages sleep folded, ink dreams in lowercase tone. Reader, wake gently. Back in the shop, a new customer arrives. Old, soft-spoken. She carries a box. Inside, dozens of bookmarks, all hand-painted, all labeled, but instead of titles or authors, they bear moods, used before heartbreak, for pauses longer than breath. Never reached the ending, didn't need to. She leaves them in a jar by the register. Ayaka adds a sign. free but irreversible. Jiro spends more time by the river now. Less walking, more watching. One evening, a group of school children skip stones. One stone lands oddly, spins in place, and settles without a splash. They cheer. Jiro doesn't join. He just whispers. Some stories don't need sound to land. Later, he writes a sentence on the back of a train ticket. The reader always arrives before the author finishes packing. He folds it and tucks it beneath a loose tile at Kojin Bunko's threshold. No one will find it on purpose, only in passing. Fushimi, ever elusive, begins compiling audio into silence. Not music, not speech, but the absence of both. She calls it a voiceless preface. She says it's what readers deserve before entering a story they might never leave. Ayaka listens to it once. She doesn't blink for 5 minutes. Takahiro won't go near it. Says it makes his hands forget how to hold pens. The shop grows quieter, yet more alive. Someone leaves a bag of dried lavender labeled for paragraph breaks. Another brings a bouquet of pressed leaves inscribed with apologies they never sent. It's not clutter, it's footnotes, all of it. Every object, every gesture, every smile from a stranger who seems to know the wrong aisle but the right shelf. Jiro senses what's coming. Not an ending, but an edit so soft it rewrites nothing, yet realigns everything. He stands beneath the shop's ceiling fan and says, mostly to himself, "We didn't build a crime empire. We built a way for the forgotten to publish. And that, finally, is the truth no surveillance could decode. That beneath all the misdirection, all the myths, all the courier codes and smoke-threaded messages, was simply a story, whispered to those brave enough to listen between the lines. It rains for 3 days straight, the kind of rain that softens the bones of the city, turns concrete into sponge, and makes everything feel like it's waiting for a page to turn. Inside Kojin Bunko, the sound of it isn't a backdrop, it's part of the rhythm. Every drop taps like a keystroke from a ghost still editing. Jiro stays upstairs more often now. He doesn't read, he listens to the quiet between conversations, to the stretch of time it takes a visitor to choose a book, then not buy it, to the way Ayaka sighs when filing poems that arrive unsigned but smell like old forests. There's one customer who returns every week, always on Thursday. She doesn't give a name, just hums. Always wears the same gray gloves. She never speaks, but always leaves behind a single feather and a note that reads, "For the character who hasn't shown up yet." Ayaka keeps them in a glass jar labeled Anticipation. On the 4th Thursday, the woman leaves a pressed maple leaf instead. No note, just a feeling. Takahiro builds a new catalog system. It has no numbers, no titles, just questions. Each shelf is indexed by a phrase. What keeps you from sleeping? Who haven't you written yet? If a sentence abandoned you, would you chase it? What memory deserves a chapter? When a customer hesitates, Ayaka walks them to a shelf and says, "Maybe start here. She's always right." Fushimi, quiet as always, has taken to leaving bookmarks in books that haven't sold. Each one bears a single word. Wait. Almost. Trust. Not yet. They're not marketing, they're whispers. And they work. Books once overlooked begin to move, as if, somehow, they've been activated. Here's a historical fact. In post-war Japan, libraries kept lists of books that were borrowed, but never returned. They called them phantom circulations, titles so beloved or mysterious that they simply vanished into reader lore. Kojin Bunko now has its own phantom shelf. Visitors ask for books that aren't there. They swear they've seen them before. Here, in this corner, under this beam of light, titles like The Reader's Exit Wound, Syntax of the Unfound, How the Rain Annotates Us. Jiro never confirms or denies. He simply replies. They sometimes come back. One evening, a girl arrives soaked in the rain, holding a soggy paperback. She says nothing, just walks to the counter, lays the book down and says, "It ended too soon." Ayaka asks gently, The story? The girl shakes her head. Me. Ayaka wraps the book in paper and hands her a blank journal. No refund, she says softly. But you can write your continuation. The girl nods, takes the notebook like it might float her back to shore. That night, the shop feels fuller. Not with people, with possibility. Takahiro writes a new phrase on the chalkboard near the door. We lend futures here, not just fictions. The rain eases, not stops, just slows like it's listening now. And in that lull, someone knocks. Not on the front door, but the back. That door hasn't been used since the final dispersal, Jiro answers. A man in a courier's jacket stands there. Not young, not old. His eyes are unreadable, like paragraphs with missing verbs. He holds out a book, wrapped in oilcloth, sealed with wax, stamped KB. No explanation, just this. You're due a return. Jiro nods, takes the book, doesn't open it. He places it behind the counter and tapes a note on top, to be read when the silence turns again. The man vanishes into the alley, boots echoing like punctuation. That evening, Ayaka reshelves the poetry in reverse order, starting from Z and moving toward A. Fushimi approves. Sometimes the end knows more. Customers wander in and somehow find the exact lines they needed without ever knowing what they were looking for. Jiro calls this unwritten symmetry. It's not mystical. It's the result of decades of careful calibration of emotional acoustics built into every corner of the space. The shelves breathe. The books remember. The ledger, though closed, still casts a long shadow across every customer who lingers 1 second too long in the blank spaces section. There's one final change that week. A new section appears. No one builds it. It just happens. It's between observation and obsolescence. A narrow shelf, no signage, no obvious system. But the books there are different. The covers are warm to the touch. The pages flicker at the edges like film stills. And when opened, only once, they whisper, "Thank you for reading us into being." By now, the story has thinned to a hush. Not because it's dying, far from it, but because it has entered the part of the narrative where things don't need to be said to be understood. The margins carry weight. The space between words is where the real plot happens. Jiro wakes earlier. He no longer writes with ink. Instead, he rearranges objects. A cup here, a folded receipt there, a book spine turned just so. It's his new language, a grammar of quiet gestures. Ayaka catches on quickly. She's fluent by week's end. The others follow. Communication now takes the form of suggestion. A misplaced bookmark, a message, a half-swept floor, a decision pending. The lights flickering once before settling, a vote cast. Fushimi, without warning, tapes a blank cassette to the counter with a label that reads, "Play only after forgetting." No one does, but they all want to. Outside, the neighborhood changes. Stores close quietly. New ones open and pretend they've always been there. A noodle shop turns into a bookstore for 4 days, then reverts. No one questions it. As if Kojin Bunko has begun leaking into the fabric of the city. Or maybe the city is editing itself. Takahiro calls it narrative creep. He draws diagrams on napkins, flowcharts that loop into themselves. One day he tears them all up and lets the scraps fall down a storm drain. "It's better that way," he says. "Stories stored too neatly don't survive the next reader." Ayaka receives a package. No return address. Just a book wrapped in craft paper and tied with dental floss. When opened, it contains a single sentence on the first page. "This is what your silence sounds like on paper," she cries quietly. Doesn't explain. She places the book in the space beneath the register, the pause shelf, where they keep stories that are too honest for immediate reading. That same week, a man returns to the shop, middle-aged, nervous. He holds a small envelope. "I was here 10 years ago," he says, "and I stole a book. I don't even remember which one, but I need to give this back." Ayaka opens the envelope later. Inside is a library card, not theirs. Stamped with the name of a library that closed in 1994, Jiro just says, file it under belated returns. They create a new drawer for it. Here's a historical fact. In 2006, a library in Illinois received a book that had been checked out in 1955. The borrower included a letter apologizing, saying, "I didn't know how to return until I became someone who could." Kojin Bunko understands this sentiment well. They begin collecting these moments, not in ledgers, not in files, in scent, in tone, in spatial memory. Jiro stops using clocks. Instead, he marks time by the number of times someone lingers after reading the back of a book. He starts counting those seconds instead. One evening, a young couple enters, silent and hesitant. They don't browse. They don't ask for help. They simply walk to the fiction section and sit on the floor, backs against the shelf, holding hands. After 20 minutes, they rise. The girl places a small folded square on the floor where they'd sat. Then they leave. Ayaka waits a full hour before retrieving it. Inside, a single haiku. "We read without words. Your silence taught us something. We can't translate yet." Takahiro, reading over her shoulder, whispers, "We're being footnoted in real time." They laugh, then pause, then wonder, quietly but truly, if that's what Jiro always intended. Not control, not legacy, but replication through reverence. Jiro stops shelving books altogether. Instead, he begins placing them on the floor in patterns. Curves, spirals, lines that only make sense when seen from the stairwell above. Ayaka calls them reader constellations. Fushimi starts photographing them at dusk. No flash, always from eye level. Then she deletes the photos before anyone can save them. "Memorize the shape," she says, "not the pixels." A new section opens. No one builds it. But there it is, a narrow alcove that smells like pine and mothballs. The books here have no covers, no titles, only inner inscriptions like, "This version only breathes when doubted." You'll find yourself on page 39 just once. The ending fell asleep, waiting. They're not for sale, not even for reading. They're for recognition. One girl spends 3 hours sitting beside them, not touching a thing. Then she stands and says, "I think I used to be this shelf." No one questions her, because here, that makes perfect sense. Late that week, Jiro places a folded slip of paper beneath the teapot on the front counter. It reads, "If someone asks for me and I'm not here, tell them I've gone to edit the atmosphere, and that I trust them with the last sentence." Ayaka leaves it there, uncreased, untouched, because some words don't need to be read by many, just by the one who asks. That night, they don't lock the door. They just dim the light a little lower and wait to see if the final reader has already arrived. Morning folds itself gently over the windows. No glare, no fanfare. Just the soft illumination that makes books look slightly older, like they've earned their dust overnight. Kojin Bunko breathes quietly. The shop has always had lungs. You just had to sit still long enough to hear them. Jiro doesn't come in that day. No warning, no message, no farewell. Ayaka notices first. She waits past his usual hour, then longer. Around lunchtime, she makes his tea anyway, leaves it on the counter, steam curling upward like a sentence that forgot its verb. But there's no worry, not really. Just the hush that comes when a chapter turns before you've caught your breath. Takahiro checks the mailbox. Inside is a postcard with a single word. Proof. No stamp, no writing on the back. The image is of an empty chair facing a river. They pin it to the bulletin board near the front. Customers start asking, "When is he coming back?" Ayaka replies, "He might already be here." Because in small ways, Jiro still lingers. The tea kettle whistles at the right time. The radio skips songs that don't match the tone. Books realign themselves during quiet hours. And each evening, someone finds a slip of paper on the counter with a quote from a book that doesn't exist. Just one line, always in his handwriting. "Don't close the book, just soften the binding." Fushimi begins curating a non-existent anthology. She creates an index of books no one's written yet. Titles include The syntax of waiting, margins before meaning, chapters from a voice I trust, last sentences to read with the lights off. She leaves the list on the wall near the stairwell, written in pencil. Customers start contributing, scribbling their own imaginary titles. The wall grows. A child adds, "The book my future self left behind." Ayaka cries again, quietly. Here's a historical fact. In certain libraries in Europe during the 17th century, some books were chained to shelves, not to prevent theft, but to mark them as sacred, to remind readers that access came with responsibility. Kojin Bunko never needed chains, just trust. By midweek, Jiro's absence has become structural. It defines the space, like a missing color in a well-balanced painting. Takahiro moves the poetry section one shelf higher, says it's what Jiro would have done. Ayaka begins writing tiny letters, 2 sentences at most, and tucking them into the pages of random books. Each one ends with, "You found this because you were ready." Customers begin reporting strange coincidences. One finds a letter about starting over the same day she files for divorce. Another finds a line that mirrors the final sentence of a dream he had 3 nights prior. A man opens a book titled Unshelvable and finds a drawing of his childhood bedroom. None of them ask for explanations. They simply whisper, "Thank you." A new visitor arrives, a woman with ink-stained fingers and a bag full of unfinished poems. She trades them at the counter for a book titled Prepositions and Their Ghosts. Ayaka doesn't remember shelving it, but she rings it up anyway. 0 yen, the price of being seen. Later that evening, Takahiro sets up a shelf labeled Apologies. It's stocked with books once forgotten, once ruined, once misread, books that fell in puddles, were scribbled over, or returned decades late with guilt folded into every bent page. Above the shelf is a sign, "Forgiveness in paperback." The books go fast, too fast. Fushimi leaves a note in their place. "We only had enough for this week's regrets. Please return next Tuesday." Customers begin coming just to leave behind their own dog-eared pages, some with tear stains, others with lipstick marks or marginalia in frantic cursive. Ayaka keeps them in a chest beneath the counter. She calls it the Archive of Almost. Jiro does not return that week, but every morning something new arrives. A bookmark etched with the words "Still Reading." A folded origami crane made from a shipping invoice. A pebble with a single kanji carved into it. Jian Ma. The Japanese concept of the space between. On Friday, a man walks in and says, "I dreamt of this shop before I came here. Every book had my name in it." Ayaka hands him a journal titled Attributions Unknown. He doesn't open it, just holds it to his chest and says, "I knew it," and leaves. By Sunday, Ayaka begins speaking more softly. Takahiro starts writing letters addressed to the next narrator. Fushimi no longer records sound. She records silences, the gaps between footsteps, the hesitation before someone says goodbye, the 2 seconds after a customer closes a book, just before they speak. That's where the story lives now. Not in pages, but in pauses. Kojin Bunko has stopped selling books in the traditional sense. Now it releases them. Into hands, into moments, into unspoken contracts. Jiro taught them this without ever saying it aloud. That stories are not something you read. They're something you receive. And sometimes, just sometimes, something you leave behind. Slightly altered. The story, as all stories must, begins to dissolve. Not end. Not fade. But dissolve. Into weather. Into gesture. Into shared memory. And untitled books left open on windowsills. Kojin Bunko no longer feels like a shop. It feels like an afterthought in a beautiful dream. And still, people come. They arrive without knowing why. Some say they were following a scent, or a sentence half heard on the train, or a feeling they'd misplaced 20 years ago. No one leaves disappointed. No one leaves unchanged. Ayaka opens late now, not from laziness, from reverence. She lights a single candle in the corner before flipping the sign, not for ambience, for acknowledgement. Takahiro, ever the cartographer of invisible things, maps the emotional geography of the shop. He draws lines between favorite shelves and the places where confessions were made. Tears were blinked back. Hands were held over books too powerful to finish. He titles his work, Topography of Almost Remembering. It's never printed, it's felt. Here's a historical fact. In ancient Japanese storytelling, rakugo, a single performer tells long tales with only a fan and a cloth. But the greatest rakugoka are said to perform best when they forget where the story ends and let the audience carry it home. Kojin Bunko is now pure rakugo. You enter, you sit, you listen, you leave, still narrating. Fushimi has taken a vow of temporary silence, not out of grief, but as a tribute. She leaves behind blank cassette cases labeled with verbs: to forget, to believe, to soften, to forgive. People begin placing notes inside, miniature stories, sometimes only a phrase. I thought I was the villain. Turns out just poorly edited. Or, no one told me my favorite character was myself. Ayaka begins a ritual on Sundays. She writes one line from a non-existent novel on a chalkboard outside the shop. This week, some stories arrive before their authors are ready. The week before, the plot never thickened. We just learned to float. A passerby stops, reads it, and whispers, "I needed that." Doesn't even enter the shop, just walks away lighter. One evening, Takahiro notices the shelf labeled Apologies has become unmanageably full, overflowing with pages, notes, coverless books, letters from former selves. He suggests retiring it. Ayaka disagrees. She builds a second shelf, labels it Forgiveness Pending. A third shelf appears 2 days later. No one builds it. It simply exists, unlabeled. People seem to understand what it's for. They begin leaving things there without explanation. A pair of reading glasses wrapped in a thank you note. A single glove made of paper. A clock with no hands and a sticky note. Finally caught up, Fushimi touches none of it. She simply watches, records the silences between contributions, calls it ambient prose. One day, a boy no older than 10 enters the shop alone. He asks Ayaka, "Is this the place where forgotten stories go to get adopted?" She smiles. "Yes." He looks around thoughtfully. "Do they ever get sent back?" "Only if they want to," she replies. He nods solemnly, selects a book with no title, and leaves without a word. Ayaka adds a sticky note to the shelf he pulled it from. "Taken. Will return when ready." Takahiro places a folded map in the poetry section. Not of the city, of emotions mapped to aisles. He doesn't show anyone. He just places it there. Whoever finds it won't tell. That's part of the contract now. Kojin Bunko is no longer curated. It co-authors itself with everyone who enters. Ayaka finds a final slip of Jiro's handwriting inside the old kettle. I was never the author, just the paperweight that held down the storm. That night she dreams of Jiro. He doesn't speak. He just sits in the chair near the window, smiling faintly. In the dream, the book in his lap is blank, but the air around him hums like it's full of lines no one needs to read to believe. She wakes without sorrow, only softness. Later that morning, as sunlight catches the dust in the air like punctuation suspended mid-sentence, Ayaka opens the door, flips the sign, and whispers into the quiet, "We're still open." Then she turns to the shelf with no label, places a book with no title, and writes on the inside cover, "This is the final sentence, unless you're ready to write the next one. So, if you're still with me," eyes half closed and thoughts drifting like pages caught in the softest breeze, "let's slow everything down now. You've walked with Jiro through a Tokyo few have seen, one stitched from secrets, stray pages, and gentle silences. You've browsed shelves of invisible books, trusted the punctuation of a glance, and maybe, just maybe, felt something stir inside you that has no name yet. Take a breath. The deep kind. The kind that rewrites a moment. There's no need to hold on to every detail. Let the story scatter like fallen bookmarks. Let the characters tuck themselves back into quiet corners. And let the soft hush of rain in the background, or maybe just your own steady breathing, carry you the rest of the way. You're not required to remember this story. You're only invited to feel it in the little spaces where quiet lives. Maybe tomorrow, you'll glance at a shelf and swear a book winked at you, or find yourself scribbling a sentence without knowing where it belongs. That's how you'll know it stayed with you, in the margins. For now, let your thoughts dim. Let your mind drift like Jiro on his final walk, not searching, not escaping, just existing softly between one chapter and the next. Close your eyes. You've arrived.